Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream as always. Hope you're doing well. So, on last night's stream, we only watched 2 3/4 of a video, with the first one being the Lore Hunter's video on the Curse Blades, Failed Aesthetics of the Hornsent, and then Smowtown's video, the Hornsent and the Crucible. So, normally I stay up past like my dedicated stream ending time just to get through all the content if it's relevant, but I was a little bit too sleepy last night, so we didn't. So to kind of rectify that, we're going to finish off with Smowtown's video on the Hornsent and the Crucible right now. We were a little bit ahead of this, but I just backed it up so that way it would all be on topic. And then after this video, I have Shadow of the Erdtree names explained by Eric, and he commented on the last video telling me what the Whistle Stop tour was. And then for after that, depending on how much time left, we can watch Elden Ring, Shinto, Symphony, Marika, Radagon, and Divine Parallels, and potentially Lore Brains, The Real Face of Lord Rykard, Elden Ring lore. So this was on my playlist for a while. I don't think we got to it, but if I watched it before, I might need to switch that out, but I don't think we actually did. So, anyway, Asenex, our Crusader, nice to have both of you guys again. I think I forgot to advertise this to the Discord. Whoops, give me 1 second. My dog is being a little naughty, so I had to deal with him and was a little bit thrown off as a result. Okay. Alright, so speaking of the dog, Asenex had a comment, or a suggestion rather, a pets channel for my 2-legged viewers to post about their 4-legged ones, or winged ones, whatever. So, I kind of do have a channel for that, at least in the Discord. That's more or less like the supporter channel, which it's permanent access if anybody ever gives me like $1 or more, just to like say thanks. Partially just because I don't want to have to moderate more channels than I already do, but yeah, if you guys want the hidden dog lore, that's the channel place to be at. So, Prince Lorian, welcome on in. May I ask where Lothric is? If you don't mind. Alright, so anyway, all jokes aside, let's go ahead and dive back into the rest of Smow's video with the Outer Gods part of the Hornsent and Crucible. And then Galaxy Dragon, nice to see you again.
Gods. We have now seen countless examples of the Hornsent coming down heavy on different cults and beliefs. However, it does seem as though some sub-beliefs were allowed, and in this case I am referring to the Church of the Bud, which we can find at the far end of Ra. However, I do believe it was likely once attached to the same landmass that Ballarat now occupies, as we can see they are extremely close geographically, and I believe that this land was once connected to one another and it made up a part of the greater metropolis of Ballarat. Part of my reason for believing so is that the Church of the Bud is actually of Hornsent construction and not a remnant of the ancient civilization of Ra. We can tell this because of the pillars in the church that have Bud statues on top of them are the signature spiral columns of the Hornsent that we can find in Ballarat itself, leaving us in no doubt that this is a Hornsent building.
And speaking of that, it is interesting that these ones have the Bud on top of them, whereas these ones don't, which leads me to believe that the Church of the Bud and its associated iconography is more limited to this church itself rather than Hornsent society as a whole, although maybe it could have been a stronger belief in the past and they got rid of it as they believed were in the spiral, but that just doesn't ring true to me for whatever reason. And Methodosuri, nice to see you again. How's it going?
Ballarat itself, leaving us in no doubt that this is a Hornsent building. Understanding that the Church of the Bud is a Hornsent institution allows us to make more sense of what we see in the story trailer. In the moment where we see a figure silhouetted by the flames of Messmer's crusade, cradling a spear. An extremely unique spear that we then see in the hands of one of the game's bosses, Romina. And the description of the pole blade of the Bud reads the following. Weapon of Romina, Saint of the Bud. A scarlet glaive with a dangling bud-like blade. Once in the crumbling, burning church, Romina held the Bud in speechless silence. That Bud would become her blade. The moment being described here is what we witness in the story trailer, Romina cradling.
And now I'm just like reminded of all of the wild speculation as to whom this could be in the early days before the DLC had launched. So some people are like, oh my god, it's a person in black. Is this the Gloamite Queen? And joke's on them, this butterfly was a different person entirely.
The blade as Ballarat and the Hornsent civilization is burned around her. And this means that the worship of the Bud was an accepted part.
All right, and then one thing that I wanted to bring up last night but forgot to, well, I thought about it, but I had been starting and stopping the video so often like I'm doing now that I just didn't want to keep doing it, is that because the Church of the Bud is on fire here, there might be more to the idea that the Rao ruins could have been burned in the past as well. I know I had mentioned that it seemed as though Salza prevented others from burning it, but I guess that doesn't really work with what's going on here. And I might need to like go back to this section of the game and see what all it's like, because perhaps the only parts of the Rao place that were burned were the ones where Scarlet Rot is growing from now, or if Scarlet Rot budded here, it could have just like originated from here and is slowly expanding over time as well.
Around her. And this means that the worship of the Bud was an accepted part of Hornsent society. As for what this religion was, is unclear, aside from the fact it wasn't always connected to the Scarlet Rot like it is now, as the Scarlet Bud item description reads the following. There was a time when these buds were not touched by the Scarlet Rot's blight, when they were the symbol of the small church deep in the ancient ruins of Ra. So in the time before they were touched by the Scarlet Rot, they were still representative of the buds of the church, and therefore this religion. Indeed, it seems like Romina manifested the Scarlet Rot after Messmer's crusade happened, as her remembrance reads the following. After the church was burned to the ground, Romina discovered a twisted divine element, which she weaved into the baleful Scarlet Rot. Perhaps then, the buds might find somewhere to gain purchase once more within the scorched remains. What is this divine element? Well, I do have a couple of ideas. The first, of course, being that it's simply an element of the outer god of Rot. A similar language is used a couple of times in relation to this particular outer god, like in the hefty pot of Rot and the map of the lake of Rot, which reads the following. It is said the divine essence of an outer god is sealed away in this land. As such, I think that in her despair, she somehow connected with a part of this outer god of Rot, and the Scarlet Rot manifested. As for what the Church of the Bud believed in prior to it becoming associated with the Scarlet Rot, we can but guess. But perhaps they did worship the outer god of Rot in the form of a bud. It was their interpretation of this being. This could explain how Romina was able to manifest the Scarlet Rot. After all, she was in despair in a church that could have been dedicated to this outer god. We know that the Hornsent interpreted the Crucible in their own form, so perhaps they worshipped the outer god of Rot in a different form as well. One need only look at the item icon for the Scarlet Aeonia incantation to see the clear similarities to this and the Bud of the Church. Additionally, Romina's remembrance tells us that the Buds were able to gain purchase once more, as if the Bud religion is based on a memory of the Scarlet Rot from long ago, as if it once held sway in these lands, giving birth to Buds, and thus
I don't really agree with that interpretation, partially because of the way the remembrance, if I can get the text back up, says, oh yeah, it sucks that it says it this way in English, that the divine elephant, what is this Hinduism now? The divine element was weaved into the Scarlet Rot. That's not exactly how the Japanese says it. I'm kind of drawing a blank on what it says, so let me double check it real quick. Wait, what is this? Remembrance of Romina? Okay, I'm looking at rotten butterflies. That explains it. So Right. So it's just like the weaved into it. So like she discovered a twisted divine element, and then she clung to the Scarlet Rot, so that way her bud could bloom in the ruins again, or as if she could do that way. Anyway, so because of that, that leads me to believe that. Hold on, let me think about this. Yeah, because it says that she discovered that divine element. That makes it sound to me as though it's a new thing, and therefore the Hornsent, or at least Romina, weren't clinging to Scarlet Rot to begin with. And I think the story with Romina clutching the Scarlet Rot is analogous to the way that the Blood Fiends discovered the twisted deity within the shadow of their revered tutelary ancestor, and that these two just kind of mirror each other. So I don't believe they worshipped Scarlet Rot originally. And then without horns, Jay Moore and Throne and Jake. Nice to have all you guys again. Prince Lorien always imagined Messmer ended up there to burn the rot before it took over, since it was so out of the way of the Hornsent area. I don't know about that, because it makes it sound as though the Scarlet Rot grew out of response to the Crusade and him and his people like burning the Church of the Bud. Okay, Without Horns is reading it the same way. Jay Moore said, if Rot is characteristic of the Golden Order per millennia and the Rot avatars, and the Erdtree / Shadow Realm is a sort of shadow of the Erdtree in gold, could the Bud be connected to the Erdtree? So, the way that I tend to look at the Scarlet Rot kind of being part of the Golden Order is that I think it was kept in check when Destined Death was still in the land, because if things can't die through like natural causes anymore now, then I think that makes the decay of the Scarlet Rot more or less last forever, because if the rot itself cannot die, then all it can do is to continue to proliferate. And even though it does say that it's a cycle of decay and rebirth in Scarlet Rot, I think like its form of decay is a bit more unique than other forms of decay, where it doesn't like kill things and make them decay that way as much as it reconstitutes them into a new form. So I often liken Scarlet Rot more to like a cancer, where it's just kind of life growing uncontrollably. But of course, a lot of that is my own headcanon. But going back to the last question, could the Bud be connected to the Erdtree? I'm not sure how you mean it that way, whether or not you mean like the Erdtree is literally related to the Scarlet Rot, or if there is merely an element of the Scarlet Rot which is tolerated tacitly by the Erdtree, in which case I would believe the latter. But if you mean the former, and if like the Erdtree literally came from Scarlet Rot, I would disagree, but I think that's just more down to individual interpretation, because there's not enough for me to believe it, especially with like the Elden Beast and whatnot. Throne asks, is the Forager Brood connected to Rot or the Old Church? That's a really good question, to be honest. Yeah, I really don't know. So as far as like the Rot goes, I do think that in the ancient past, even before like we even really know of, that the Scarlet Rot might have been, or at least like the outer god or its avatar, its scorpion thing, might have been in the Shadow Realm region, potentially over by like that scorpion catacomb. But of course, something in the DLC says that they grew larger in the Realm of Shadow, so there's probably some change which affected things. So of course that outer god's avatar may have like died and been sealed in the Lake of Rot ultimately, but we also don't really know what the landscape was like in the before times, which is really disappointing in some ways. Okay, let's go back in.
As if the Bud religion is based on a memory of the Scarlet Rot from long ago, as if it once held sway in these lands, giving birth to Buds, and thus this religion. I do believe this is likely, as we know that the Outer God of Rot has had worshippers in the past, as is the case with the Old Lords of Rot, that's described by the Mushroom Crown, which reads the following. Long ago, great lords served the Scarlet Rot. Perhaps such fungal bodies served as their crowns. Ultimately, I believe that the Hornsent worshipped the Outer God of Rot in the form of a bud, and that when the church was burned down in the Crusade, Romina managed to connect to this being and bring the Scarlet Rot into this realm. Perhaps the Scarlet Rot once flows in the ancient...
And I do remember, remarking last night that I feel... Although, it's definitely possible that the Hornsent could have revered so many different divine elements of the world, I do think Smogh Town is kind of pulling them in a few more directions than I'm comfortable with, personally, with the way that he said that they worshipped the lion gods as their gods, then the Crucible, and now the Scarlet Rot. And if that were the case, I would have liked to have seen more imagery throughout their culture that I could more directly tie to the Scarlet Rot than the incidental resemblance between Romina's burned down bud and that of the Scarlet Ionia.
Ancient civilization of Rot in the past, and it's from them that the Hornsent...
Although I guess there are the scorpions, but they're kind of eaten, which maybe that's even more evidence to suggest that they didn't believe in the Scarlet Rot, because then why would they, kill and consume the Rot god's avatar's kin, if that makes sense?
First discovered the religion of the bud. After all, we know the ruins of Rot were of great interest to the Hornsent and that they studied it. The Sprite Stone item description reads the following. According to the records left by Hornsent scholars, there were also contrivances known as bond stones that could manipulate the moment that the sprite vanishes. So it seems as though this explains the presence of Hornsent ghosts throughout the Raw runes. These were scholars, and indeed they do use sprite stones against us in an offensive manner. In general though, it seems as though the runes of Raw just became an extension of Belorat's domain, hence the Church of the Bud, Bird Warriors, and the Lion Divine Beast Dancer that we can find in this area. Romina and the Church of the Bud does not seem to be the only isolated incident of the Hornsent interacting with an outer god, and there are a couple of other events in Hornsent history which I find very interesting. Firstly, we have the existence of the Blood Fiends to consider, a really cool design, and initially these appear to be an entirely different species, that clearly interact with the Formless Mother. We can see this from their visual design alone, given they are able to use similar blood boon incantations to the one that Mogh uses. We get confirmation that these beings are able to directly commune with the Formless Mother via Blood Fiend's Sacred Spear, which reads the following. One of the most significant... Blood Fiend's Sacred...
Alright, so talking about the lore Rorschach, or the Lorschach, if you will, this kind of resembles the Divine Gate, now that I think about it. Even though it's obviously supposed to have been an arm bone, but... I don't know, I said obviously, I would not have guessed that without the item description. Anyway.
Sacred Spear, which reads the following. One of the most significant implements used in their blood rituals. Sacred spears of blood are the instruments of communion with an outer god. The Mother of Truth desires a wound. One of the Blood Fiend's main strongholds is Rivermouth Cave, a cavern clearly dedicated to the worship of the Formless Mother. There is an altar in this cave, and on the altar is sacred bloody flesh, the item description of which reads the following. Raw meat soaked with blood, a delicate...
I should look at some of the icons in a bit more detail, because maybe this interwoven design shows up elsewhere. I mean, it looks familiar enough, but I wonder if there's more direct matches in the game to consider.
Item description of which reads the following. Raw meat soaked with blood, a delicacy of the Blood Fiends. The blood is said to have fallen from the Formless Mother's wound. Never will it dry, never will it rot. This is pretty extraordinary. These Blood Fiends are not demigods like Mogh. and yet they seem to have such a strong primal connection to the Formless Mother that they have been able to retrieve her very flesh. It's clear that these beings have created their own ritual and ways of honouring the Formless Mother. For example, we just read that the bloody flesh is a sacred delicacy of the Blood Fiends, meaning they don't only worship this flesh of the Formless Mother, they eat it in an act of communion. Additionally, we have the Blood Fiend's arm, the item description of which suggests ritual sacrifice or dismemberment of their own people in honour of the Formless Mother. Additionally, we have the Sanguine Flower, the item description of which reads the following: a blood flower with meaty petals, material used for crafting items, grown by blood fiends in pools of blood. Perhaps even the fiends admire blood's beauty. So the blood fiends cultivate these blood flowers, and in a lot of ways it mirrors the sanguine faith of the Mogh dynasty, given the importance of blood rose to the Mogh dynasty, like the blood roses that we find at Rose Church in Liurnia. Ultimately, the Blood Fiends and Mogh's dynasty are two parallel faiths that have developed independently, both communing and worshipping with the same being, having very similar practices. And I actually take this as further evidence that the Mother of Truth is not the same thing as the Blood Star. Here we have a completely isolated clan who discovered the Mother of Truth for themselves, independent of Mogh's dogma and beliefs, and yet despite this separation between the two religions, they more or less worship the Formless Mother and commune with her in the same way. There was an opportunity here that if the Blood Star and the Formless Mother were the same thing, that FromSoft could have integrated the practices of the Thorn Sorcerers with the Blood Fiend's worship of the Formless Mother.
So I was thinking about this earlier today, as a matter of fact, as I was looking back at a lot of things relating to sin to see if there's anything to parse over again with the new lens of the DLC. And I'm going to make a couple notes before I forget. Otherwise, I'll just forget them. So give me a second here. Blood Fiend, cannibalism. And what did Smo just talk about? Blood Star. And sin, maybe. So, yeah. The Blood Star is the first thing that I can address right here. So let me pull up our spreadsheets again. And this isn't like an English or Japanese thing. But anyway. I should probably do this because every time okay. Alright, so as far as this spell is called, it's the Briars of Sin and the Briars of Punishment. Which are, yeah, perfectly fine translations there. So, an aberrant sorcery discovered by exiled criminals. Theirs are the sorceries most reviled by the Academy. Wounds the caster with Thorns of Sin, creating a spiral of blood thorns. The sorcery can be cast repeatedly up to 3 times. The guilty, their eyes gouged out by thorns, lived in eternal darkness. There, they discovered the Blood Star. So, obviously, before the DLC was released, it seemed pretty cause and effect that once their eyes were gouged out by thorns, they lived in eternal darkness. And maybe this still is the case, like the whole there they discovered the Blood Star. Let me double check this actually. Yeah, so maybe this isn't important, the point that I was going to try to bring up. But, just for, posterity's sake, I was wondering if this kind of reference to eternal darkness could have been a veiled reference to the realm of shadow. But obviously, we don't really have a ton of eyeless folks within the realm of shadow, so this probably isn't ultimately a reference to that. But I was just wondering that because we did end up getting more Mother of Truth type stuff going on there. And there's a lot of really weird connections between the Sorcerers and the way the Hornsent Inquisitors had golden barbs in their ancient tower hexes, sorcery / incantation things. And then, right, the next thing I wanted to mention was the blood fiend cannibalism. So I was a little surprised that Mogh didn't bring it up, and I was going to wait to see if he did. But yeah, when he was talking about them eating the sacred flesh and potentially consuming... I don't remember if he said they were consuming their comrades or anything like that. But we do have some visual evidence of that in the places we can find blood fiends. And I had a couple clips of that, I think, on my last video, but... Rao Ruins is probably like the first place I really noticed it, because I just had the opportunity to like sneak up on them and like really observe. And the Hornsent, which eat their fellows, seem to have their eyes glow red, which is pretty cool. And I think some of these are corpses and some are... like, some can get up and attack us, but I don't really remember off the top of my head. I think... okay, no, maybe... I think this dude might get up, but the other guy off to the side might be just a blood fiend corpse. So... right. I guess I'll leave the blood star alone for now, but I will make another note to go along with that if we don't get to it at the end of the video.
Or drop any other hint that they were one and the same. Instead, we get everything that is in line with what we know as the Formless Mother and her worship, and no mention or indication that the Blood Fiends connect with the Blood Star at all. For a more in-depth discussion on the differences between these two, I would direct you towards my Blood Star lore video, as I feel it holds up very well, especially following the DLC. At first glance, you could easily mistake these beings as being their own race, but there is some lore that suggests that they may have been a Hornsent tribe themselves. The blood fiend hexer Ash reads the following. Long ago, a subjugated tribe discovered a twisted deity amongst the ravages of war, and they were transformed into blood fiends. The Mother of Truth was their saviour. So this tells us that they were made into the blood fiends, and this explains their primal connection to the Formless Mother. There is another item that relates to this event, and it does mention fires, making me feel like the subjugation of this clan took place during Messmer's crusade.
Had he not used it before this point? Is this literally the first time I'm noticing my guy is repping the Mogh? Hell yeah.
I feel like the subjugation of this clan took place during Messmer's crusade. I refer to the Outer God heirloom found in Prospect Town, guarded by the Blood Fiends. This talisman reads the following. A talisman engraved with the lore of an outer god. The clan, who lost everything in the Great Fires, peered upon the corpse of their ancestor, normally an act of sanctity, and saw in its shadow a twisted deity. The clan had suffered such torment that the horrible thing was taken as an object of worship. This does suggest that Messmer's crusade was responsible for their subjugation and despair, and in an event similar to Romina, they made contact with an outer god, whilst worshipping at the altars of one of the withered ancestors. I do really like the parallel of circumstances between this clan and Romina. Both of them touched an outer god in a moment of despair, and it shows that these outer gods are looking for any opportunity that they can exploit so that they can spread their influence in the mortal realm. And I suspect that another way in which an outer god spread its influence was through the horrifying fly sickness, a malady that affected the Hornsent. We know that these man-flies were once Hornsent, thanks to the description of their ashes, which read the following. Afflicted Hornsent eventually metamorphosized into a fly-like form. It was believed that the moment the transformation took place, they were relieved from their suffering. This disease was deadly, and those that were transformed were the unlucky ones, as those too weak to bear the sickness instead died, as is suggested by the description of the ailment talisman. But where did this sickness come from? Well, I believe it suggested this is a fungal infection, as the man-flies drop the fly mold, a fungal product that is created from the innards of these creatures. Being fungal related, one may initially assume that this is a malady of the outer god of rot, spreading disease to increase its influence. Additionally, some of the rot flies are poisoned, They exist in a poison swamp, and overall they just fit the themes of decay and rot that we often associate with the outer god of rot. However, if we look a little closer, I do think this is likely the work of the Formless Mother. Accompanying the
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that he was bringing up the rot for a second, if for no other reason than when you use the, well, he'll probably just say it, I'll shut up.
flies, there are sometimes just Hornsent spirits around them, and these cast Swarm of Flies, and this is an incantation that is directly associated with the Formless Mother. Why is it specifically these Hornsent that are associated with the manflies that are casting these incantations? Well, flies are actually associated with the Formless Mother. For example, we can find the blood-tainted excrement in the blood swamps around Mogh Palace, and the Swarm of Flies incantation actually reads the following. The new palace of the Lord of Blood lies in a swamp of festering blood, and these flies are said to spawn from the excrement of that land. So I do lean towards this being a disease of the Formless Mother's making. There's also a conspiratorial aspect to this. I think that the ailment talisman is actually suggesting that this disease was spread by those who were caring for those who fell ill, as it reads the following.
Now that I look at the talisman, obviously this part of it is used to dangle from the string and whatnot, but the little spinal column thing coming out of this back is kind of reminiscent of what you see on the blood fiends as well.
Oddly, those who cared for the infected made certain they were given a proper burial were never afflicted themselves. What if these carers are actually the Hornsent spirits that cast the Swarm of Flies? And this is why they remain close to the manflies, because they once quote-unquote cared for them. But the fact that they can use this incantation to me suggests that these are actually agents or cultists of the Formless Mother, and that they spread this disease in her name. It's just...
I like that idea a lot, to be honest. I do prefer my own idea that they may have been more analogous to perfumers, and by providing succor to those who were dying, that kind of made them die free of pain, which alleviated the kind of curse-like symptoms from spreading further. Because then why is it only... Yeah, because I guess like this interpretation doesn't have a good explanation for why the affliction only affected those who were not given proper burials and whatnot. I know I did not phrase that super well, but hopefully you guys get what I mean.
It's a theory, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do think it fitting that the Mother of Truth has a strong connection with the Hornsent, manifesting in two separate tribes, the Blood Fiends and the Manflies, because in the base game we know that she gained a foothold thanks to the Omen Lord Mogh. Mogh's blood was the medium through which she first communed with him, and now it is Mogh's blood through which the dynasty is connected. We know that everyone who is inducted as part of Mogh dynasty has Mogh's blood injected within them, and this is why the Sanguine nobles have Omen horns, as do the Albinaurics of Mogh Palace. It's again a way to spread this corrupted and potent
Bro, what is this shot? Where did he get this? This is great.
blood, and thus spread the influence of the Formless Mother. Omen blood is more potent and concentrated than normal blood, a theme that was also explored in Bloodborne, in which another formless god, Erdtree, also found it easier to commune with those of corrupted, vile blood. Thus, if the Hornsent are similar in physiology to the Omen, perhaps it isn't a surprise that the Formless Mother is so capable of communicating with them. Not only this, but in the case of both the Blood Fiends and the Manflies, she's actually manipulating their physical form, really reinforcing the potent connection she has with these beings.
Legacy
I
of
now
the
want to
Hornsent.
discuss the legacy of the Hornsent to the greater lore and to the history of the lands between. I'm not going to talk much about Messmer's crusade, as I've covered that really thoroughly in both my last two videos, and I just don't want to repeat myself once again, but let's touch on some timeline aspects. As I theorised in my Messmer lore video, I believe the Hornsent civilization was not wiped out by Messmer until much later on in the period of Erdtree rule, and that for a time they were allowed to exist under Marika's rule. As such, the Hornsent were allowed to carry on some of their practices for a time. For example, we have the item Festive Grease, which reads the following. The delightful festival is an old tradition, one old enough for the Erdtree to tacitly tolerate its endurance. This implies that this particular Hornsent celebration was allowed to survive under the rule of the Erdtree. Additionally, there are further examples of a sort of cultural overlap or osmosis between Leyndell and Bellerat. For example, there is the Dueling Shield, which reads the following. An armament once used in ritual combat performed to honour the Erdtree, a custom that has somehow remained within the realm of Shadow. This is of course a reference to the gladiatorial fights of the Erdtree arenas that were meant to honour the Erdtree, and somehow it made its way to the lands of the Hornsent, and this highlights how close the two cities must have been at some stage in Marika's early rule. Additionally, earlier...
I get what he's saying with that. I don't know if I would tie it to Bellerat specifically as much as it was either like Rolana or the Shadow Keep in terms of the dueling reverence goes. But Little Church Lord, nice to see you again. Welcome back in.
Here we spoke of the jar practices of the Hornsent, and of course we have to recognise the fact that the Erdtree rule has their own jar warriors, their own jar system. The process here under Leyndell is of course very different, with Alexander being a good example for us to observe. These jars seem to collect dead warriors, and do it with some reverence and respect. People are not punished and put inside these jars. These jars are a sort of collection service for fallen warriors. Ultimately, the jars seem to be a delivery service, bringing the corpses of the fallen to the roots of the minor Erdtrees, perhaps to be absorbed, and thus the jars have a more positive role in the Erdtree system of life and death, assisting Erdtree burial. Clearly Marika took the jar practices of the Hornsent, a practice which she knew all too well, and repurposed it for her own faction. Zuli the Witch actually just did a video on the jar innards, which I highly recommend and again will link below, and Zuli ended on a rather poignant note, reflecting on the fact that this might be Marika's attempt to honour her people, repurposing the process which was used to oppress her people, the shamans. These are just a few examples of the cultural overlap between Leyndell and Bellerat, showing that Marika's Leyndell society ultimately evolved alongside Bellerat, at least for a time.
So I do really like the distinction of saying that the warrior jars are taking the innards of the dead rather than those who are still alive, potentially like with the shamans. I'll probably need to think about that a bit more.
Thus it's no surprise that the Hornsent who remain resent Marika greatly. They probably existed peacefully under her rule.
The Erdtree is my people's enemy, by Marika long betrayed, set aflame.
We also have to talk about the original sin that is mentioned in Messmer's Remembrance, as I believe this has a lot to do with the Hornsent. To me, the original sin has to be a reference to Marika ascending to godhood, her original sin at the beginning of this new movement and religion. The story trailer shows and refers to this moment, and it refers to it as a seduction and a betrayal that led to her creating Shadow and Gold, usurping what other power structure the Hornsent had previously. As we discussed earlier, I do believe the Hornsent must have had their own god. They are the original owners and creator of the Gate of Divinity, and of course they must have had their own god as a result.
So this brings up a couple things that I'm still trying to grapple with myself, so take a lot of this with a grain of salt. So like I said, last night, or maybe it was the day before, I think it was last night, I've been working slightly on a Miro board, not for like any like real public purposes as much as it was just trying to get a bit of a visual guide as to some things pertaining to the timeline between the DLC and the base game, and I don't necessarily fully believe this yet, but I'm just trying to explore some things. So with that being said, if the Hornsent and the Glowmite Queen had their own god, then who is their lord? We're told Placidus Axe was an Elden Lord in, as far as the hearsay goes, in the Old Lord Talisman, something like that. So if the Hornsent had a god, should it have been Placidus Axe's god? Is there even another so-called Elden Lord that we don't know about? How does one reconcile those beliefs? And the whole original sin thing is interesting. I'm still kind of the mind that the original sin should be burning the Erdtree, or a tree from which the Erdtree sprang, a golden tree, whatever the hell that actually means, because the Crucible is shaped like a tree according to the Silurian thing. I thought I put a note there, but apparently I didn't. And going back to, what was it, the kindling? Oh, did I get rid of it? Okay. So, this is remembrance, I think. Oh, there's a lot more impalers than I thought. Alright, so as far as the remembrance of the impaler goes, it says, a malevolent snake writhed within Messmer, and so his very mother plucked out his eye and put in its place a seal of grace. Yet having done so, her fear compelled her to secret away her child within the realm of shadow. The Japanese doesn't say anything about fear or feeling compelled to secret Messmer away. It just says that even though she replaced his eye with a seal of grace, she hid him in shadow, essentially. And then the final line is, hidden away, keeping company with the original sin and a hatred that would not be confined. And part of the oddity about this description is that we've got the weird line break, which can make this sound a bit more separate than what came before, but I think it might be read, or might be meant to be read as like a continuous thought, which might change that interpretation a little bit. Or maybe not. It doesn't really, well, let me try to rephrase that. It can impact one's understanding of the final line, I guess. So the original sin, Hajimari no Sumi, like Hajimari is like the beginning, and then Sumi is sin. So that isn't exactly how the Catholic version of original sin is called, which I think is just Genzai. Yeah, Genzai, original sin, and that's the Catholic version, or a Christian version, I guess. So, the cardinal sin, I'm kind of drawing a blank right now. Too many forms of sin. I'm blind. Cardinal sin. Okay, yeah, Gensho no Taizai. So Gensho is like the beginning or origin, and then Taizai is like a great sin, essentially. Or apparently mortal sin, deadly sin. I don't know enough about Christianity to truly understand the difference between a so-called great sin and a mortal sin, which I'm sure we might have some people in the chat dying a bit on the inside for that. But anyway, going back to the whole original sin comment, and I hate it. So for some reason, I kind of interpreted the original sin and the unforgettable hatred being within Messmer. And I don't exactly know why I thought of it that way. I mean, I kind of do, but I guess in the grand scheme, it doesn't make the most sense. So let's look up kindling. The kindling that burned inside Messmer the Impaler, a dark thing eaten away at by a wicked serpent. So, because the serpent seemingly ate away at the kindling, I was like, well, maybe that wasn't originally part of him. And if we're told that the original sin was burning the Erdtree, then wouldn't it make sense that the so-called beginning sin also have to deal with kindling or burning a tree of some sort? So I just kind of thought that the... I'm blanking. Original sin, whatever they called it in English. Let me get back to it. Yeah, the original sin of this might have been related to Messmer's kindling, but that might not actually be the case. I think Starfish on the Discord brought up a good point that rather than this pertaining to Messmer, this final line could be talking about being hidden in shadow more specifically, which kind of makes sense. So Messmer keeping company with the original sin and a hatred that would not be confined could be external things to himself. So the original sin could potentially be Marika's actions, and the hatred that could not be forgotten could just be like what the Hornsent feel toward him, which is it's definitely plausible, but not what I got out of it on an initial reading. All right. And then Elmo, nice to see you again. You asked, would the Hornsent god, if there was one, even have the Elden Ring before Marika? Which raises as to what/where was the Elden Ring in Placidus Axe's reign? Right, so that's kind of like why I've been trying to diagram this stuff out and see what does and doesn't fit. And while these two can fit together, we just don't have a lot of evidence to link them. Unless you really build into the idea that Sarash as a lion could have been the connecting force between Fair Missoula and Beliarat because he was the Beast Lord, essentially. Or Beast Lord, Lord of Beasts, whatever you're going to call him. But it just really sucks that we don't have any really shared iconography between these two cultures. And if Marika did slay that god, one of the questions that kind of comes up to mind is like, what the hell's going on with the finger slaying blade? And then where does the Glowmide Queen fit into things, depending on how one feels about that predecessor god, if there was one. So as much as it sucks to try to like simplify things based off of what we have at times, like, this is really becoming almost, I don't want to say like too much to handle, but it's like your hands are definitely full with what you have, or it's like we're juggling too many things. I don't know how else to explain it. Throne thinks that the Hornsent were obsessed with Crucible magic. Maybe the Elden Beast fell after the Hornsent were veiled. After they were veiled, so a lot of that ties in to what you think veiling the Hornsent is or was, because if you believe the Erdtree grew after Marika did her thing, I can see what you mean by that, but I think Marika would have needed the Elden Ring immediately after veiling the Hornsent, so to like grow the Erdtree. So having like said all this, I'm really wondering whether it's possible that the Hornsent civilization as we know it and its rise actually could have happened under Godfrey's time during the age of the Erdtree, and if that pertains to the so-called betrayal by Marika, if they were like seemingly on the same side of the war against the giants, or what all that could mean. Because if Marika betrayed them at that point, she'd just kind of be betraying their expectations with what they could have believed the Erdtree was. And so I could see the Hornsent potentially venerating the Erdtree for its like blending powers, even though they do seem to be doing other stuff. Maybe that could have been a function of the older Erdtree, I guess. Maybe I should say Godfrey's Erdtree rather than older, because it can be a little bit confusing with all this. And yeah, Alma also brings up the point that even if the Elden Beast fell after the Hornsent revealed, we still have that very difficult to reconcile depiction of the Elden Ring in Fair Missoula. But like I've said before, not on this stream, or at least not tonight, there is the possibility that that depiction of the Elden Ring in Fair Missoula could have been put there later. And Marika does have some connection with Fair Missoula through Malekith as well. So it's just so weird because, like, the fire giants in some respects seem to be tied to Fair Missoula because the Forge sends us there, but Marika also seems to be on the side of Fair Missoula because, like, Malekith is the beast clergyman of Fair Missoula, but she was also a shaman in the shaman village, and the shaman had been abducted by the Hornsent for their own purposes. So it seems like the Hornsent, it's like a square where none of the corners fully meet. It's really weird. So anyway, now that that's out of the way, let's go back to the video.
In the trailer, we see Marika pull some golden threads from a corpse. But what is this corpse, or who is it? For me, it can be little.
And I was kind of wondering whether or not this so-called corpse thing could be a flower or something like that.
Doubt that this is the Hornsent divinity. We have no mention of this god anywhere else, and to me it makes sense that Marika would erase this part of her history. I believe she somehow got close to this god, seducing them with politics or in a more literal sense, and then murdered them, taking their golden power and using it to forge her own order and become her own god. I believe that Marika wishes to bury this part of her history for no other reason than she may suffer the same fate if it was discovered. Think about it. We know from Corrin that the Golden Order is founded on the principles that Marika is the one true god.
The Golden Order is founded on the principle that Marika is the one true god.
So how would people react to know that godhood isn't something necessarily truly divine, rather it is a power that can be claimed? If this truth became known, then people would realise that Marika isn't a true god given divine right. She is just the most powerful being of this age who claimed power for herself. Marika controls these lands through religion and dogma. This makes people obedient. And if this illusion was shattered, new people would try to seize power from her, as Mikla does himself when he too discovers the truth of her origins. As I mentioned in my story summary video, I do believe that the Nox, beings who are close to Marika in lineage, did know how she became a god, or at least had some understanding of it. And this is why we find the petrified bodies all throughout Noxtella. These petrified bodies are very similar to the ones that are found in Inir Elim, and it to me indicates that they were trying to replicate this process and create their own divinity.
And if they weren't trying to create their own divinity, I think there's a really good claim to be made that this might be part of the ritual of lordship. But having said that, I also don't really like that idea because we don't technically do that when we become Elden Lord, unless you want to make the claim that, of course, all the people that we genocide along the way are part of that mass sacrifice, but I digress.
So Marika uses her son, Messmer, to destroy the Hornsent and seal away their secrets.
Our lands were by thy kind set aflame, our tower by thy kind veiled in shadow.
Before sealing Messmer himself in the lands of Shadow, bearing the truth of her origin and raising herself up as the one true divine god, and in time people would forget about the Hornsent, burned and obliterated, and would only be remembered by a few. It is truly a forgotten piece of history, and as far as most modern people are aware, Marika is just the one true god. The one true god who built her empire upon the Hornsent who came before her. So thanks guys, that is my take on the Hornsent and their culture. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, whether you disagree with me, agree with me, or if you think I missed anything. Remember that if you like Elden Ring lore, then please like this video and consider subscribing to the channel, as both help the channel out immensely. Let me know what you'd like me to cover next, and until next time, I will see you in the shadow of Ballarat. Take care and have a wonderful evening.
Alright, cool. So yeah, that was another good video by Smo. I'm going to go ahead and link it into chat. Meow. So here we go. Little bit unfortunate that I didn't finish it yesterday, but you know, sometimes that's how it is. So Nectarine, welcome back into the chat. And you were saying, surely the evidence of the Empyreans would convince people that godhood isn't unique. I think that really depends on how widely the concept of Empyreans were known to the populace, and certainly by the time of the Shattering, it would probably be a bigger deal and maybe perhaps part of people's claims for the throne or godhood or whatever you want to call it. But beforehand, I do wonder if that might not have really been advertised because of Marika's penchants for wanting to keep things within the family, and that might get complicated a bit, especially depending on one's idea of the Glowmide Queen. But there also was a ton of war and conquest before that, so the concept of Empyreans might not have been super relevant to the everyday average commoner, I guess. Asnex said his voice is really relaxing. Yeah, so he's able to speak really slowly and concisely and sound very natural doing it, which is a skill and a half at least. Or well, it's difficult for me to do. As you guys see on my stream all the time, I tend to speak fairly quickly and I don't want to say like slur, but I certainly could do a better job articulating my words at times. But anyway, right, so going back to my notes about Sin and the Mother of Truth in Blue Skidoo. Okay, so hold on here. Let me pull up the spreadsheet. All right, so we have the Sacred Relic Sword. Sword wrought from the remains of a god who should have lived a life eternal. Thoughts on what the weapon portends are many and varied. Some consider it the mark of a great sin or a sign of great devastation. Some think of it as an end of an age, while others the beginning. So I was re-examining this and I was like, this seems to have a lot of odd parallels to that story trailer because, hold on, maybe it's a little bit more direct than the Japanese. Alright, yeah, so the English is fine. Maybe it's just, I don't know. Sometimes it feels a little bit easier for me to like connect themes together just looking at the Japanese text for whatever reason. But anyway, the Sacred Relic Sword signifies great sin and potentially a beginning, which is very interesting in relation to what we learn about Marika and whatnot, because we have the original sin here talking about the beginning. Oh, that's probably why. Yeah, okay. Yeah, because this is original rather than beginning. That's why it seemed more obvious to me in the Japanese. So, as I was saying before, Hajimari is like beginning, and for this construction of it, it's just written with kana, but this one actually has the kanji, so it's going to look slightly different if you guys can recognize any Japanese at all. This is the kanji for Hajimari. And anyway, we have this great sin plus the beginning potentially tying together and like the end of an age. And I was like, wait a second. I mean, obviously this is kind of referencing Marika and Radagon to some degree. There has been a bit of a debate about whom exactly the Sacred Relic Sword signifies, because Marika turns into Radagon, who seemingly gets turned into the sword by the Elden Beast. But we're also told that Radagon wasn't a god, and when we kill the Elden Beast, we get the god slain message appeared. So it doesn't seem as though we technically would kill Radagon because he's not a god. But does that mean the Elden Beast was a god? Potentially. And so going back to this description, if it's wrought from the remains of a god, but we see the Elden Beast wield it, then this doesn't seem like it's the remains of the Elden Beast exactly. So then does that mean Radagon was the god, or is it really just Marika? Because we get that from her remembrance. Anyway, that's kind of like a lot of mumbo jumbo that really says much ado about nothing. So, just going back to that whole connection between whether or not this is Marika or Radagon, I think in many ways this might be more analogous to Radagon just because of the fact that he seemingly gets turned into the sword. But if it's Marika, it's still evocative enough to make me reconsider what exactly is being talked about in that story trailer. And while I know the most common interpretation of events of that story trailer would be that that Marika was doing that at the beginning of her age, I am kind of wondering if what we see taking place there was actually the end of Godfrey's age and then the beginning of Radagon's. But I don't really know what to think about that. I come off as more of a natural speaker. He's more of a teaching style. I don't know how to take that, but thank you. Nectarine said the Finger Slayer blade was also born of a corpse. Right, and I wondered whether or not Marika was using the Finger Slayer blade to kill that god in that intro trailer, if that indeed was a god, and if that could help explain where the heck that happened on the timeline. But we don't even really get any Nox information in the DLC. So we just have a lot of threads that don't really connect anywhere, and they're just kind of not even fully self-contained or self-realized. Right, and then Little Church Lore was saying Radagon is associated with the impenetrable thorns, and likewise the Shadow Tree is too. And so I think if I do make my video talking about the different trees and whatnot, that I am going to have to tie a lot of this stuff together, and the impenetrable thorns is indeed directly affiliated with the Shadow Tree, and I don't remember how they call it in the English for the thorns of rejection or something like that. Or do they spurn all? That spurns all. The thorns are impenetrable. Okay, so that's perfectly fine in English. Kyozetsu no, yeah, okay. So we've got the impenetrable thorns affiliated with the Erdtree here, and when we look at them, they have Radagon's sigil on them. So if the Shadow Tree is indeed relating to Radagon, when does it begin to exist? And if it did exist at the beginning of Marika's reign, then one of my questions would be, when was it made distinct from the Erdtree, if it was ever part of the Erdtree, or did it grow up later? And some of that also ties into when was the land separated versus all this other stuff. So I think with the Carians being in the Shadowlands and the aspect of dueling being a carried over tradition, it should suggest that the sealing happened later, but I don't necessarily know if the Shadow Tree preceded the sealing somehow. Emily is the Pants noted that Radagon's braid is visible in the story trailer, which is interesting to consider. I really didn't want to go down that route because as much as I joke about the whole lore shock thing, I feel like Marika pulling out the golden threads and looking somewhat masculine is just one of those topics where you can't convince anyone otherwise other than what they think it is. And maybe that's just me being a little bit too cynical, but I don't even really know how I feel about that, despite how I feel about Radagon's connections to the Scooby-Doo tree. So, right. As Little Church Lore was talking about with the Shadow Tree, another thing which is very interesting to me in relation to the Shadow Tree is that it's described as being born of dark notions that bear no sense of order. And order being tied to gold and the lack of it is very interesting. Also in the context of the minor Erdtree incantation, which describes it as a secret incantation of Queen Marika, only the kindness of gold without order. So it suggests to me that the Erdtree was without order, at least in the very beginning portions of its life or whatnot, and it was made to become ordered later on, potentially after like casting out its shadow, if you want to call the Shadow Tree the shadow of the Erdtree in that regard. And that may or may not tie into how destined death is called the Forbidden Shadow that was plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation. So I really do think this stuff leads into this direction, but I still really can't get over how Marika is pulling the threads out of that thing that we see in that intro trailer. So if that moment marks the beginning of the Golden Order, it sucks that it seems as though it should be talking about Marika at the beginning of her reign with Godfrey rather than Marika at the beginning of her reign as Radagon, I guess. But of course, we might be able to like get people more on board with that theory if we say that this is like half Marika turning into Radagon, like becoming the Lord God hybrid. So maybe that's why we needed that ritual specifically, as opposed to whatever we do with Ronnie to kind of institute her as a new god. With that, Horn said, if the trailer was Radagon's ascension, then shouldn't he have been a god? If so, then when would Marika have decided to shatter the ring? So that's a good question, but I think the Marika was already a god in that respect, and the way that Mikola kind of kills Mogh and uses his body to call back Radon might be what Marika is doing, but for Radagon. And I don't really know how I feel about that in general, but just the fact that this ritual doesn't just call back the god, it also seems to call back the Lord if they are dead or something along those lines. And I guess I'll pull up the secret right scroll so it just doesn't sound like I'm talking out of my ass, which is fun to do, but few can decipher the scroll which describes the secret rite of the divine gateway said to be found at the tower enshrouded by shadow. Quote, a lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel. So this is kind of really vague in English as to like what the hell a vessel is, because vessel in English can mean something as non-specific as a grail or a cup or a chalice. So it's like, oh, does Radon need a drink? But anyway, in all seriousness, as I've talked about before on the streams, the Lord's soul will require a Yorishiro, which is kind of hard to describe. I think Wikipedia has a good article on it. But, okay. A Yorishiro is, in Shinto terminology, is an object capable of attracting spirits called kami, thus giving them a physical space to occupy. So, it doesn't help that the term used for kami can mean God as in like the Marika sense of God, or something a bit more mundane like the spirit of Thomas Edison as the kami of electricity, I guess, or how a kami can possess trees and things like that. So if Radon's soul needs something to attract it, to give it physical space to occupy, aka Mogh's body, and the god is attracted or guided by the Lord, then it seems like there are two different events going on within this secret rite, even though they're kind of conflated as one event, which is, you know, kind of annoying to talk about. Little Church lore feels similarly. Might suggest that the fall of man was Radagon's presence in the land between, also known as the original sin. The vessel with the pistol has the brew that is true. I do not know what that means. The fact that it's a quote. Gonna visit the old Google. The pellet with the poison, 1956. The Court Jester, 1955. So this is completely unrelated, but there has been a movie that I've been trying to find since I was a child that I just cannot do it. And it's more or less like an old night movie where there's like two parts of the movie that I remember pretty vividly, and I remember almost nothing entirely after that, because I probably watched it before I was literally like 4 years old. There's one part of the movie where this girl is like skipping and singing Frere Jacques, and I can't find that anywhere. I've like tried scouring the internet to like find a movie with a girl singing Frere Jacques, and there's like this weird horror movie that is not what I'm looking for, and then just I'm not gonna go through however many freaking YouTube videos there are of like literally little girls singing Frere Jacques. I'm just not gonna do it. And then like nobody seems to know it. I've like looked up where Frere Jacques appears in movies on like the Wikipedia article, can't find what I'm looking for. And then the other scene of this movie which kind of stands out to me is that there's this like night guy, and he goes into a cave which is essentially seems like a volcano full of lava. So I'm really curious as to what the hell that was, or if I'm just like combining two different movies in my mind somewhat. Anyway, that wasn't important, but looking at the little Knights of the Court Jester thing just kind of reminded me of my chagrin and not being able to find this fever dream of a movie I had as a child. That's all I have for those two movies. Well, one movie, but yeah. All right, so going back to that whole Radagon thing, I think I might have made my point clear enough. Oh yeah, gold without order, golden order. So yeah, I think a lot of this stuff could still point to the idea that I've had for a long time that the Golden Order started with Radagon, but it just really sucks, as I've like said like 4 or 5 times now, that the trailer makes it seem like it should be Marika's actual ascension to power, especially because it's not just the trailer, I should say, because we get Mikola and his whole journey allegedly being following the footsteps of Marika to become a god, and he is led up to the Divine Gate. But I guess one question we could ask ourselves about Mikola's journey is he doing this to become a god himself, or is he doing this to make Radahn his lord more specifically? And there's just so many unanswered questions about Radagon, despite Marika being Radagon, that is worth considering. So I haven't said this in a while, and I know this is like a point of bitterness in a lot of people who played the DLC and were disappointed in having to fight Radahn Prime Plus for the final boss, but I really would have liked that idea a lot more if part of the reason why Mikola wanted Radahn to be his lord was so that way he could possess him or possess his body to like have a strong body, since he's just like a little kid essentially, and so he doesn't really... He would never get to know what it's like to kind of reach adulthood and have that level of strength and whatnot. So it's just kind of even more of a bitter disappointment that we didn't get something more along that line in the final version. Nectarine said, Marika never had to take out her eyeball and remove her arm. Or did she? I mean, she is kind of missing her left arm and we don't see her eyes. And so I do say that like a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I mean, it's kind of true. Despite her being depicted with 2 arms. So perhaps it's a little bit unfair for me to say it that way. Okay, I think that's about all I wanted to talk about with that. All right, and so like the final question is then, was that Erdtree burned to create this new version with Radagon? Is that where that original sin comes from? The sin of the beginning, the cardinal sin? I think so. But I am also willing to entertain that a different tree could have been burned to begin the age of the Erdtree, or that the Erdtree could have been burned out of retaliation by the giants at some point. Because it's very weird to me that Marika goes out of her way to seal the flame of ruin if Messmer's flame is capable of burning the Erdtree. But I guess that interpretation doesn't need to be that strict if Messmer's flame didn't necessarily burn the Erdtree like I was thinking for a while, and that he is literally just with the original sin, whatever that means. But if the original sin is different than the cardinal sin of burning the Erdtree, the first cardinal sin, as Ania tells us, that is just, it's really sloppy writing if that is the case, and there's no way I can like really see us getting around that. But okay. Enough waffling with all of that. Thank you all for sticking around for that. And let me know if you guys like that idea, or if you hate it, or if you think that it should definitely be more widely spread with like a devoted video on that. Because I want to do it, but I feel like I'm taking a little bit of crazy pills. So, okay. With that all being said and out of the way, let's go ahead and transition into Shadow of the Erdtree names explained by Eric.
Hello, and welcome to the long-awaited follow-up to my first etymology video.
So there's another video. Okay, so, yeah, it sounds like he fixed a lot of his mic issues because he sounds really echoey here in this one. So maybe...
This time revealing the hidden meanings behind the location, item, and character names in Shadow of the Erdtree.
Yeah, I would suggest that if you reference a previous video that you want people to already be aware of, to like put up a thumbnail or tell us what the title of it is, so that way we could look it up easily. Because it's just a little bit extra annoying having to look at a channel and then look back at what they have to see what it is. So, okay, maybe Dragon's Names Explained would have been the first one. Okay. So yeah, just a couple more extra motions. Might not get as many people moving that direction.
I'll be looking not just at where the names come from linguistically, but at the references being made and how they tie into the lore more generally. And believe me, there's a lot of very revealing information here. One thing you'll notice as we go along is the sheer breadth of historical and language sources being drawn on. And that's a very deliberate choice by FromSoft. Lorically cluttered world building is how they create a more immersive experience. It makes the world feel real and multifaceted. A deliberate choice by FromSoft. Lorically cluttered world building.
Did he say lorically?
Is how they create a more immersive experience. It makes the world feel real and multifaceted in ways we'll never fully understand. One last quick thing to mention before we get started is that the English names sometimes only make sense if we look at the Japanese spelling first to account for extra syllables, especially U's. Sometimes these get transliterated into the English names, sometimes not, but I'll point these out as we go along. I was pleased to see that Ymir has finally made an appearance as I anticipated in previous videos. Those who watched my first etymology and world-building videos will remember we discussed Ymir, a progenitor figure from Norse mythology whose body parts were said to make up the physical world. I only originally discussed Ymir at all because that is the alternative name of Aurgelmir, from whom I suggested Mount Gelmir got its name. Ymir...
Yeah, I definitely knew about the Hever-Gelmir connection and Ymir from like Norse mythology, so I wasn't too surprised to see this name as well, but I wouldn't have said like I anticipated it. But yeah, this is kind of one of the funnier parts about like talking about the lore of Elden Ring, because there are a number of people who ascribe different types of worldviews onto the game, whether that be the alchemical worldview, the like Gnostic worldview, my like Shinto ones at times, and we also have, actually we don't really have a lot of people talking about the Norse stuff, except really in passing. Is that true? Maybe I just haven't seen it. To be fair, I can't say I've really gone looking for it. So maybe, yeah, maybe I'll try to look for a Norse Erdtree or Elden Ring video sometime, just because we've had like so many other ones. But anyway, my point is, you've got like a lot of conflicting mythologies which seem to inspire different parts of the game. So I don't know how safe it is to take from like one idea in particular, which I'm not saying that's what Eric is doing right now, but I'm just saying that I appreciate that he's like going through the etymology and pointing out some of these things.
And the subject of body parts leads me neatly onto Mete, Mother of Fingers. Mete is, as far as can be ascertained, the oldest form of the word from which most other words for mother are derived, including the ancient Greek and Latin. That is important for...
I was also wondering if meteor was like a play on words for like meteor. Meteor. But anyway, if it is related to mother, that's pretty interesting. And I was going to say that kind of sounds a little bit silly, but then I woefully remembered that we've got divine bird with Ornis in the game. So perhaps it wouldn't be out of character for them to call her mother of fingers.
2 reasons. The first and most obvious is that it cements her identity as the Mother of Fingers. The other, more subtle reason is that using such an ancient word implicitly codes Mete as belonging to the earliest knowable era of the in-game world. As we see from her remembrance, she is a daughter of the Greater Will and was the first shooting star to land. Now, having long since been abandoned, she is, in many ways, ancient history. The names of the finger ruin seem to be a few extra finger-themed references packed in. Spelling aside, Deo is Latin for God, so this may be inspired by the famous finger of God in Michelangelo's Birth of Adam. Rhea may be a slightly more oblique reference to the Greek goddess of the same name, who was served by the fingers, or dactyls in Greek, 10 mythical smiths who imparted knowledge of the alphabet to mankind. I wonder...
Okay, I like that connection a lot as well because of the fingers giving people the words of their faith via runes, I suppose.
If this is the inspiration behind the Smith script items. Sometimes they are recorded as being 10 in number, sometimes 3. That, of course, would have heavy lore implications if it is correct. Finally, Mia seems to come from the word for finger in various Celtic languages. R'hllana is introduced to us as Renala's younger sister. R'hllana is obviously not an...
So, Mir is interesting to me, because when I saw that name, I was also reminded of an old game by Climax Entertainment called Landstalker, and that came out on the Sega Genesis, and there was an old wizard-type dude named Mir, and that's what I kind of associated with that. I do know that it's also a surname, so I wonder if that's also related to fingers, or if it comes from another etymological root entirely. Just because, like, former professional MMA fighters like Frank Mir and whatnot. And then, hello, goodbye, welcome into the stream. Nice name. You had the primitive thought of this?
A name with meaning in its own right, but an inverted form of her sister's name. Let me quickly remind you that Renala, rather like Renata or Renee, means rebirth, which of course accords with her role in the game.
I did not know that. I appreciate this.
Also mention, just because it's my favourite little theory, that her name may also be a pun, because the first part, renal, is a word in its own right which means relating to kidneys, and the embryonic larval tears which initiate rebirth are conspicuously kidney-shaped. R'hllana's knight Moonrathel is a callback to Dark Souls 3 and Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. The name Irithyll is a Tolkien reference derived from the Sindarin Elvish for moon. The two castles in the early section of the game both have Latin names which suggest their involvement in war. Ensis simply means sword and was mostly used in a poetic sense. It is associated with long swords as opposed to the shorter gladius used by Roman foot soldiers. Belorat comes from the verb bello, which means to wage war. This one is a bit tricky since Belorat is not a valid conjugation, but rather a transliteration from the Japanese spelling with the extra U left in. The Japanese syllabary, as some of you may know, doesn't allow for strings of consonants. A more conventional transliteration gives you the intended form bellato. That is a third-person future imperative form and means we will go to war. We discussed in previous...
That's interesting. Okay, so it's like the doubling. Yeah, I could see how he's going for him with that.
We will go to war. We discussed in previous videos the heavy religious imagery which I believe...
That font is a little bit weird because this looks like Migala or Migaya and Trina rather than Mikola.
...inspires Mikola and Messmer. I won't repeat that entire discussion here, but given that Mikola is, if I'm correct, inspired by St. Michael, I checked to see if there were any links between Trina and St. Catherine, which is the full version of that name. Very pleasingly, it turns out, St. Catherine of Siena, an important saint and mystic, is strongly associated in her iconography with lilies. I already spoke about the symbolism of lilies in the St. Trina video, but this is yet another connection which potentially explains why they chose that name. Messmer's name also has links to St. Trina and the theme of sleep, which, to me, confirms that they were designed and planned partly with each other in mind. Messmer is a name from Middle German meaning knife maker, although I think he is named after a specific individual, namely Franz Messmer. Franz Messmer was a physician whose experiments with magnetic forces formed a precursor to the field of hypnosis. It is from him that the word mesmerized comes. The Euporia twin blade, inspired by Mikola and Melania, takes its name from the ancient Greek word for abundance. No surprise here, since we've known about this weapon for some time already. Thiolier is a curious one, conspicuously French in a way that made me certain it must have been a reference to a particular individual, but of the few people who do bear that name, none seem in any way to be connected to poison or plants or anything similar. I found the answer only once I checked the Kana spelling and discovered that Thiolier is a creative localization of the much more common name Thierry. It is in...
Yeah, so that was one of those ones that's a little bit weird to look at. I wondered at first whether this was just a really big, what's the word? Liberalization done on the part of the localizers to come up with this name because it's quite fanciful. But when I looked at the Japanese, I was like, oh no, I could definitely see why they would come up with a Thiolier. Because it's Thierry, which is, you know, kind of Thierry. Thierry.
Inspired by one of the titular characters in the 1621 play Thierry and Theodore, a Jacobean revenge tragedy in which Thierry, brother of the king, is poisoned by his evil mother Brunhilde. At the end, as he lies dying, unable to rest, Brunhildt is apprehended and subject to sleep deprivation as punishment. Then he dies, and his fiancée Ordella comes to his deathbed and dies of a broken heart.
Wait, what was that last girl's name? Odella. Okay.
Comes to his deathbed and dies of a broken heart.
That's very interesting. I want to learn more about that story, because that does map on, fairly surprisingly well to Tiolier's story here.
Caro's hidden grave is a reference to Charon, the ferryman of Greek mythology who delivered souls over the river Styx to the underworld. That's why this area, all the way down to the fissure, features these large stone coffins in the form of ships. The ball-shaped figureheads are an interesting feature. In terms of Greek mythology, the only link between bulls and water is that Zeus, in the form of a bull, abducted Europa and swam her to Crete. Cheaper than flying, I suppose. More broadly, even though water is a pretty universal symbol of life, in Elden Ring it seems to be associated with death. Godwyn's corpse has mutated with a fishtail, the undead are summoned by mariners, and spirits seem to be able to take the form of jellyfish, or now eels.
And beyond that, you also do get the odd aqueous fluid flowing out of Godwyn's eye right after he's assassinated in that opening trailer. So Hello Goodbye was saying it's like the deeper they get into Elden Ring lore, they seem to find intangible connections, by the way. And it's the Book of the New Sun, but it's just a surface level. Yeah, so I definitely know what you mean about how some of the connections end up feeling intangible the more you look into it. Or you might find connections which might make sense to you, but they might seem intangible to other folks, which might be even more infuriating.
Rao is one of the more obscure and yet most enlightening references used so far, and is a concept from ancient Hindu cosmology. The Japanese uses the same spelling for both, but the English localization drops the final U. Rahu is the precessional orbit of the moon, which, where it intersects the path of the sun, causes eclipses. Despite not being a physical object, it is traditionally allocated the role of a so-called shadow planet, owing to its astrological influence. It is ascribed the role of an evil body, an enemy of the sun and moon, and associated with confusion, materialism, and fear.
And if I remember correctly, this guy is also known as Ravana, but I might be misremembering my Hindu mythology, which I am not super familiar with at all.
The lore parallels are pretty clear. Obviously, this is a very early precedent for the concept of a shadow world, and was likely considered a noteworthy reference for that reason alone. Romina, her temple and the sealing tree all take their inspiration from the Roman goddess Romina, who was invoked for breastfeeding mothers, both human and animal. Her temple stood next to the sacred fig tree under which Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, were nursed by a she-wolf. Anytime the tree withered, it was taken as a bad omen for the city, and it was desperately revived or replanted. If we really stretch, we could say it's appropriate that it was a fig tree, because fig leaves have the connotations of covering up, just as the sealing tree covers up or obscures any limb.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I have some... I want to look into the lore of fig leaves, or not fig leaves, but fig trees a bit more, I guess, now that I think about it. Because they've always been really fascinating to me, but I just know very little about them in general, other than fig is delicious. And then Iron Lung, nice to see you again. Did Marika take the grace from the Hornsent like the Tarnished? That is a good question, because that would first imply that the Hornsent would have had grace to take, which is arguable, especially with some of the content which said that grace came with the Erdtree more specifically. But then, of course, that might tie into when one thinks the Hornsent society existed in relation to the Erdtree, which is, I'm certain, going to be really contentious amongst the broader community. Figs also have wasp eggs in them, which is sort of like a scorpion. Thank you, Nectarine. I will remember that the next time I eat a fig Newton, that I'm also eating wasps. Oh no! Figs are pollinated by wasps burrowing inside of the fig and then dying in it. You know, maybe I don't want to learn more about figs after all, and as they say, ignorance is bliss. Where is the ceiling tree for me?
Enirilim is an interesting and unexpected turn into Akkadian. That is the language of ancient Mesopotamia, written in cuneiform, and one of the oldest languages known to have existed. In the Mesopotamian religion, at certain times at least, the chief deity was the sky god An, whose spouse was the earth goddess Antu. The Enir, which comes from the word for weariness, was her ritual bedchamber in the temple complex. Ilim means of God, and so this legacy dungeon has a name which means bedchamber of God. I will talk about this more in a dedicated video, but the implications of the name tie into the lore of the Gate of Divinity and the fact that a consort is required. This so-called bedchamber temple is where lordship is ritually, if not sexually, consummated into godhood. Incidentally, Akkadian is a Semitic language, which is why the name Enirilim may strike you as having a ring of Hebrew or Arabic about it. It suggests something ancient and mysteriously holy. Another Akkadian reference is to be found in one of the more unexpected places, namely Midra's manse. Nanaya, depicted here in the portrait, takes her name from the Mesopotamian goddess of love. Midra, or
that is one of the most evil-looking goddesses of love I've ever seen.
Takes her name from the Mesopotamian goddess of love.
Because like the red dots, it just looks so wonky.
Midra, or Mithra, are...
Or I guess like also the little horns on the top of it. Oh, confirmation that Nanaya is Hornsent. Anyway, Methoda is bringing in some of the more deep lore takes, in that in the right communities is a hot topic of whether you can be considered vegetarian if you eat figs. That's wild. I had no idea. Can the same be said of honey consumption?
Spellings of Mithras, a deity from the old Persian Zoroastrian religion and an all-seeing god of light. The root of his name, which means binding, also makes him the god of oaths. The lore of the Frenzied Flame is heavily inspired by Zoroastrianism, which views fire as having ritual purifying qualities and where fire temples are the chief sites of worship. If enough people in the comments are interested, this is something I might unpack more in a separate video. Yori the Inquisitor takes his name from one of the many hundreds of versions of the name George that exist in all languages. This is a reference to Saint George, who defeated the dragon with his lance. This is reflected in the way the Inquisition lanced Midra, the aspiring Lord of Frenzied Flame, with their spear of torturous barbs. Let's finish off with the
I like it, I can see that, yeah.
Shadow Tree, which is of course the central and defining feature of the Shadow Realms, just like the Erdtree in the lands between. As I mentioned, these names both come from Proto-Germanic, with Erd meaning earth, and Skardu meaning shadow. You can see how the gradual softening of the K gives rise to words like shadow and other related words like shade. So there you have my rundown of not every single name in Shadow of the Erdtree, but what I consider to be the most interesting and enlightening ones. I've presented these on the basis that I consider them to be convincing explanations, but if you have any other ideas or spot something that I may have missed, please share your theories in the comments. If you enjoyed this video but haven't seen my etymology video for the base game, I can recommend watching that for plenty more lore discoveries. Stay tuned for more lore, mythology and game design, and as ever, thank you for watching.
Yeah, that was another great video, just all around. So, I'm going to go ahead and share it with you guys in the chat if you want to give Eric some support. Yeah, so I learned quite a bit. Obviously, there is always going to be some debate about the veracity of such claims because they can potentially map onto a couple different sources depending on one's preferences. And then we always have the Freudian thing, like sometimes a cigar is a cigar, and there might not be any deeper symbolism that's meant to be attached to these names. But considering how well certain names like Metter or Ronala seem to align with their characters, I do think that gives some more support for these kind of symbolic readings of the text. And you guys know how skeptical I am of symbolic readings in general based off of some of the other lore videos that we watched. So it's refreshing to have one that I think kind of passes the sniff test, I guess. So I'm going to need to be right back for a couple of minutes, and then after that we will come back into the stream with Nocticles, Elden Ring, Shinto, Symphony, Marika, Radagon, and Divine Parallels. So stay tuned. I'll be back in just like 2 or 3 minutes. The Tomb of the Giants is a pretty scary area, especially on a first playthrough. I'll just go ahead and say it so we get cursed. I do kind of remember the layout of the area, but a lot of the specifics are hard to remember. Byhander, and I think as we start to go down now we get shot at, if we're not being shot at right now. Okay. I thought there was a way to fall there. Shows how well I actually remember that layout. Actually, let's try to be smart for once. Wait, I don't think I have any of the prism stones. That's all of my stones are in Dark Souls 3. I think it's a little bit further to the left. Spamming the R2. We said we're gonna go about this normal style. It's actually going this way. And then we slide down here and make a right. Oh, it's this one, isn't it? That we just drop down. Okay, so I was misremembering where. So now we should be like right by the bonfire. Alright, I am back. So Little Church Lore was saying that Eric's video discusses Messmer's etymology and makes a mistake. Messner is the German word for knife and is often mistaken for Messmer. Interesting, because I looked that up as well and I saw similar results for Messmer, for like knife maker or something like that. So I would be interested in learning more about that. Okay. So now that I'm back, we will check out Nocticles Vidya on Elden Ring, Shinto Symphony, Marika, Radagon, and Divine Parallels.
Elden Ring, a collaborative masterpiece.
I'll turn that down a little bit.
Between Hidetaka Miyazaki and George R.R. Martin unfolds in an intricate tapestry woven with threads of Shinto mythology. At its core, the narrative mirrors the Shinto belief in primordial gods empowering others, manifesting through the parallelism between the Shinto deities Izanagi and Izanami, and Elden Ring's central characters, Marika and Radagon. This exploration seeks to unravel the layers of these connections, delving into the profound impact of Shintoism on Elden Ring's narrative. It's important to note that these comparisons are speculative, and the Elden Ring lore draws from a variety of mythological influences, not exclusively Japanese Shinto. The connections are intended to highlight thematic similarities rather than direct equivalences. Without further ado, let's get academic.
Hell yeah, I could definitely appreciate that sort of disclaimer as an academic warning as well. So yeah, obviously with the focus on my channel, Shintoism comes up quite a bit. I don't want to say that I'm like super familiar with Shintoism, but I'm, probably a bit more familiar than your average Joe on the block. So if this guy has a more intimate understanding of the religion / practices, I will be eager to learn more. So let's see how this goes.
The stories of Izanagi and Izanami and Shinto beliefs serve as the cornerstone for understanding the cyclical nature of life, death, and creation in Japanese mythology. Born as divine siblings from celestial forces, they embarked on a monumental journey to create the Japanese islands, using the sacred spear Ame no Nuboko, leading to the birth of the first island of Japan. While Izanami and Izanagi are indeed the progenitors of humanity in the primary islands of Japan in Shinto tales, they are not the most primordial or powerful beings in the universe.
And I've wondered whether or not the Spira being a spear which reaches... No, not Spira. Spira being a pillar which will reach to heaven is meant to map onto the iconography of these two, because of the way that throwing the spear kind of created a pillar which supported the heaven and created the Japanese islands. But I don't really know how well that's supposed to work, or even if that was intended at all. So just food for thought that I don't really fully buy in myself.
Prior to their birth resided other lone gods, or Hitorigami, and it was these Hitorigami that in one way or another helped give rise to the male and female pair of kami known as Izanagi and Izanami, who I liken to Marika and Radagon of Elden Ring. The concept of primordial gods conferring empowerment resonates deeply within both Shinto and...
Oh yeah, and there is also the divine marriage between Izanami and Izanagi, if I'm remembering correctly, in that... Oh no, maybe it's not them. Like I said, I'm not extremely familiar with Shintoism, but they may have like walked around one of the pillars. I think it was like a total of 3 times. And then I always forget which one is male and which one is female. I think Izanagi is the male and Izanami is female. And at the end of their circuit, they met and like talked to each other, and then Izanami spoke first, and that was kind of like a transgression that nobody knew about apparently. And so some of their children may have been born malformed. And anyway, that's like not extremely relevant to Elden Ring perhaps, but I do kind of wonder about that in relation to her children being cursed. But that doesn't work super well, I think, with how Marika's children, the Omen children, are like born of Godfrey in Marika, it seems, instead. Nami is female. That's what I thought, because like Nami as a name is very common in Japan. It sounds very feminine. But it's just a Gurren Lagann reference, or is a Gurren Lagann reference a Shinto reference? Got him.
In Elden Ring, the divine siblings Izanagi and Izanami, creators of the Japanese islands, well, only 8 of them technically, find echoes in Marika's empowerment by the greater will in Elden Ring. This video delves into the intricate web of parallels between these divine beings, examining how the empowerment bestowed upon Marika draws inspiration from the foundational tales of Shinto creation. The transformative journey into godhood, orchestrated by primordial beings, stands as a recurring motif intertwining Shinto and Elden Ring. Marika's metamorphosis under the auspices of the greater will mirrors the deeds of Izanagi and Izanami in Shinto. As Elden
I'm sorry, but the closed captions under the oops
of the greater will
of the greater will is just such a Midwestern whoops.
Deeds of Izanagi and Izanami in Shinto. As Elden Ring's cosmogony unfolds, the cyclical nature of life, death, and rebirth emerges as a central theme, aligning with the Shinto belief in the interplay of cosmic forces. Originating outside the lands between, Marika hails from the Numen race, a mysterious and long-enduring people. Moreover, she holds the status as an Empyrean, a unique being born of a single god, thereby possessing the potential to claim the title and power of a god herself. Although debates persist over the qualifications for being an Empyrean, considering Ranni's apparent birth from 2 parents, a prevailing notion suggests that one must be born from a lone god to merit this classification. This engenders numerous questions, not just about Ranni but also about Marika's parentage, a topic left deliberately ambiguous. Could her parent be the greater will itself, thereby establishing a profound connection to it and the genesis of the Golden Order? Regardless of her parentage, the fact remains that Marika was born of a solitary god, yet she is also a Numen, sparking inquiries into the mechanics of such an existence.
So yeah, that part goes a little bit beyond the text, I think. But also, to be fair, this was made 8 months ago before the DLC had released. So I definitely see why it would be reasonable to think that she could have been a direct child of, like, the Greater Will at that time.
Parallels with the tale of Shinto creation, where Izanami and Izanagi, the creators of Japan, conclude the 7th generation of kami, following the manifestation of the Amatsu kami. Varied accounts offer divergent perspectives on their birth. Some narratives suggest independent manifestation after the advent of other kami, while others propose a single parent, the identity of which varies. In one version, Ayakashikwan no Mikoto emerges as the goddess birthing them, a kami from the 6th generation of the initial 7 generations of kami. In an alternate rendition, their parent is identified as a deity named Awanagi no Mikoto, representing the 5th generation descendants of the primordial deity Kuni no Tokatachi no Mikoto. This intricate tapestry of mythic lineage mirrors Marika's enigmatic heritage, the elusive nature of her parentage aligning with the veiled origins of Izanagi and Izanami. In each iteration, parallels can be drawn to Marika and Radagon, as it's evident that Marika, like Izanami in a variant of the tale, was born of a single god, although the relationship between the Shinto kami is more straightforward than depicted in Elden Ring. While Izanami and Izanagi may have originated from a single god, they were still recognized as kami, albeit with distinctions from the preceding lone kami of creation. In a comparable vein, Marika may belong to a godlike race, akin to the Numenorians from Tolkien's Middle-earth. Prior to Radagon assuming the role of her consort, Lord Godfrey sired her golden lineage, indicating that Marika and Radagon were not perpetually unified. In one of the Echoes of Marika, the Queen's Bedchambers, Melina recounts Marika expressing,
O Radagon, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
So just wanted to welcome in Hilko, who just caught up and wanted to say that figs are the best, coming in with some of the hot takes now, apparently. For some reason, like, this just looks extra spirally. I know it's not, it's just because of the flame effect, but it just kind of caught me off guard for a second. Anyway, I'm a little bit surprised at this aspect of trying to parallel Shintoism to Elden Ring, just because I'm not really feeling it that much. Like, I think it's a little bit better when the focus is a little bit smaller, and I do kind of wish Noctigul went into a little bit more about what these gods kind of represented, because their names do have, like, some etymological significance as to the kind of beings that they were, which I'm not super familiar with, like, this aspect of Japanese, because, like, these names are, like, coming from ancient Japanese. So yeah, anyway, if some examples come up, I might stop it again just to talk about them, but anyway.
This revelation underscores Marika's divine prescience, suggesting that she foresaw Radagon's eventual fusion with her. Alternatively, it raises the possibility that Marika actively selected who she desired to join her in godhood. The complexity of their shared being and divergent aspirations echoes the dynamic of Izanami and Izanagi in their narrative. Notably, various instances in historical and modern Japanese media depict male and female twins symbolizing a potent mythic bond, often entangled with incestuous overtones. Consider the Shinto kami, Izanami and Izanagi, who, as primordial figures, jointly give rise to numerous kami in the major islands of Japan. The similarity in their names, denoting she who invites, Izanami, and he who invites, Izanagi.
Okay, cool. So you're starting to get into it?
Signifies not only a romantic partnership, but also a twin connection. While acknowledging the potential discomfort surrounding this motif, it's worth noting its prevalence across diverse regions and folklore, including Western examples like Greek mythology. Anyway, my point is that while Marika and Radagon aren't twins in the conventional sense, they symbolically embody a connection, sharing the same body and technically existing as one person, yet two separate entities simultaneously, akin to the interconnectedness often attributed to twins across various cultures. Another relevant parallel arises in Greek mythology, where humans were initially two beings with two heads and two arms. Fearing their formidable power, Zeus divided them, condemning each to an eternal quest for their other half. And while this isn't directly tied to Shinto tradition, I find the resonance compelling, particularly in Marika's expressions about Radagon being her yet-to-be unified other half, even though the reason for this union remains unclear. It piques my curiosity whether Radagon might be a Numen like Marika, or if not, perhaps he is an Empyrean himself. This speculation could shed light on Ranni being an Empyrean, considering Radagon's red hair stems from a giant's curse. Thus, we do not know his original hair color, nor much about his past at all for that matter. The thematic thread of the twin connection remains significant.
So there are some issues with that, which I don't really blame Noctugal for, in that the Japanese makes it sound as though they were cursed by the giants, and not as though the giants are all cursed to have red hair, and that's kind of a big difference, depending on one's viewpoint of that. And I think the Empyrean comments are a little bit weird, so I think they were just a little bit too focused on Miquella and Melania being Empyreans born of a single god, and maybe a bit too closed off to the idea of Empyreans being able to exist in other aspects in the lands between.
As Marika and Radagon, being technically of one god, give birth to Empyreans, intertwining familial relationships. The sacred union of Izanagi and Izanami, symbolized by a ritualistic circling around a heavenly pillar, led to the birth of numerous islands and deities, shaping Japan's early landscape. However, amid the joy of creation, tragedy struck when Izanami gave birth not only to several demon children, but eventually to Kagetsuchi, the fire deity, resulting in her untimely demise. This tragic event set the stage for Izanagi's perilous journey to the underworld, Yomi no Kuni, in a desperate attempt to reunite with Izanami. The descent to Yomi no Kuni unfolded a harrowing encounter for Izanagi. Confronted with Izanami's transformed and decaying form, his journey back to the living world became fraught with peril as vengeful spirits pursued him. The purification rituals Izanagi performed during his escape culminated in the birth of significant deities, namely Amaterasu, Susanoo, and Tsukuyomi, establishing the foundation for the Shinto pantheon. And, if you happen to be a Naruto fan, those names likely sound pretty familiar. As part of his escape, Izanagi strategically sealed the entrance to the underworld.
Okay, so as far as that myth is concerned, some other things that are worth noting is that the reason why he couldn't bring Izanami back is because she had already partaken of the food of the underworld, which I think that's a pretty common trope amongst many civilizations, that the dead who kind of ingratiate themselves to the realm of the dead can't leave it thereafter. I think there might be something similar to that with Hades in Greek mythology. Not like Hades himself, but somebody went to go visit Hades to get his wife back, but he couldn't grant the request because the wife had already dined in that version of hell, something like that. Persephone. Yeah. Okay, thank you guys. So another aspect of Izanagi's escape is that once he... I might be confusing a couple different myths here. I'm trying to recall whether or not he doesn't get to look at Izanami while he's in the underworld, or he tries to bring her out and the condition is that he can't look at her. No, maybe that isn't Izanagi in that one. But anyway, we do get some of the centipede-esque creepy crawly connection with his escape from Izanagi, or Izanami rather. Let me just look this up real quick. Alright, I'm just going to the Wikipedia for Descent into Yomi. Izanagi, wishing to see Izanami again, went down to Yomi, the land of the dead, in the hopes of retrieving her. Izanami reveals that she had already partaken of food cooked in the furnace of the underworld, rendering her return impossible. Izanagi, losing his patience, betrayed his promise not to look at her and lit up a fire, only to find that Izanami is now a rotting corpse. To avenge her shame, Izanami dispatched the gods of thunder, known as Yakusano Ikazuchi, the hags of Yomi, and a horde of warriors to chase after him. To distract them, Izanagi threw the vine, securing his hair and the comb in his right hair knot, which turned into grapes and bamboo shoots that the hags devoured. Upon reaching the pass of Yomotsu Hirasaka, the flat slope of Yomi, Izanagi took 3 peaches from a nearby tree and repelled his pursuers using them. He then declared the peach fruit to be divine and bade it grow in the land of the living to help people in need. When Izanami herself came in pursuit of him, Izanagi sealed the entrance to Yomi using a huge boulder. Izanami then pronounced a curse, vowing to kill 1,000 people each day, to which Izanagi replies that he would then beget 1,500 people every day to thwart her. So, yeah. So there were some similarities to other cultures, with like not being able to look at her, but then doing it anyway, and that like causing disaster. So the Hags of Yomi. Oh, so these are the storms. Okay, some tellings say that the 8 deities were from the maggots of Izanami's rotting corpse. Okay, so that, like the maggot type thing, could be the thing that I was talking about. And then there's some other larger potential connections between Elden Ring and Shintoism, with Yomi and Neinokuni and like the land of the dead. But I don't want to get into that. And I don't think this video is going to get into that because this was before the DLC released. So I might just talk about it after watching everything. But I really don't know how I feel about it despite everything. So anyway. Cerberus the Watchdog also prevents souls from leaving Tartarus. Yes, true story. And you think that's why the Catacomb Watchdogs drop spirit ashes? Or souls? The Catacomb Watchdogs? Of the Deep? Very food-themed underworld story, yeah. Okay.
Establishing a permanent barrier between the realm of the living and the domain of the dead. This act of division...
Oh, the Burial Watchdog Catacombs. Sorry, yeah. That makes sense. I'm going to back it up a little bit. Oh, so you think the Catacomb Watchdogs represent Cerberus. I could see what you mean by that, because they do kind of have the 3 heads. Or do they? Or is that just the one variant? No, not Ninokuni, Neinokuni. So, actually, I don't know what the Ni and Ninokuni is. Is it just 2? Anyway, Neinokuni is like the land of roots, but I don't want to get too off topic just yet.
Escape, Izanagi strategically sealed the entrance to the underworld, establishing a permanent barrier between the realm of the living and the domain of the dead. This act of division assumed a pivotal role in Shinto beliefs, profoundly influencing the cultural perceptions of life, death, and the divine within Japanese mythology. Radagon's endeavor to mend the Elden Ring, mirroring Izanagi's quest to retrieve Izanami from the underworld, unveils a poignant mythic parallel. The utilization of the same hammer implicated in the shattering becomes a symbolic gesture, emblematic of the cyclical nature inherent in creation and destruction. Radagon's exertions, culminating in punishment and incarceration, resonate with the repercussions faced by Izanagi throughout his journey to Yomi. In the myth, Izanami, having consumed the food of the underworld, becomes bound to the realm and endeavors to retain Izanagi in the realm with her. Parallelly, Marika seemingly compels Radagon to be tethered to her, dwelling within the Erdtree after dismantling the Elden Ring. Nevertheless, Radagon persists in his attempt to mend the Elden Ring. It's also open to interpretation whether Radagon is as deteriorated or as fractured as Marika, which could again mirror Marika serving as an analog for Izanami, having evolved into the decayed goddess of death, in contrast to Izanagi, who came to be recognized as the god of creation. Depictions often shroud Marika in darkness, while Radagon emanates light from within him, echoing the roles Izanami and Izanagi play in Shinto narratives. Izanagi escapes the underworld, purifies himself in water, and begets 3 prominent kami.
And this isn't really relevant to Elden Ring at all, but I just do want to point out, in case anybody ever played the game and didn't know of this connection, that the main protagonist of Persona 4, his starting persona is Izanagi, so enjoy.
Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Susanoo, paralleling the 3 children Radagon had with Rennala, born separately from his other half, akin to Izanagi. Moreover, where Marika shattered the Elden Ring, Radagon endeavored to restore it, symbolizing his role as a builder and creator, analogous to Izanagi going against Izanami to create life while she continues to take it. It's noteworthy that, like Izanagi, Radagon enjoys free movement, while Marika is ensnared, confined within the depths of the Erdtree, barred.
So I do think he might be going a little bit too heavily into the Radagon aspect of the relationship with Marika and kind of glossing over the Godfrey thing, maybe because it's a little bit too inconvenient for this parallel.
From defending it against the Tarnished, having defied the greater will. Izanami, alongside her brother Izanagi, assumed a pivotal role in shaping the Japanese archipelago and populating it with deities. Her dual persona as a goddess of death and creation embodied the cyclical essence of life, an enduring motif entrenched in the foundational tenets of Shinto. The tragic culmination she faced during Kagutsuchi's birth, culminating in her demise, underscored the intrinsic interplay between creation and destruction, an idea vividly realized as she transformed into the goddess of the underworld.
And if he's making those Kagutsuchi connections, I would have liked to see more done with that with the fire giants and the Flame of Ruin, perhaps. But he obviously doesn't have to do it. I'm just thinking about that out loud as like, is there more of a connection to be made there? I haven't thought it through, so maybe.
Her act of creation precipitated her own demise, ultimately engendering the dichotomy of life and death as distinct realms and states of being. This thematic resonance echoes in Elden Ring, where Marika aspired to eradicate the inevitability of destined death. To achieve this, she concealed the rune of death with her shadow, Malekith, giving rise to the Golden Order, an era of immortality and the perpetual recycling of souls. With absolute dominion over life and death, Marika determined the fates of individuals, selectively bestowing the gift of grace, particularly withholding it from those affiliated with the Crucible or other outer gods. Marika emerged as the arbiter of life and death, birthing numerous demigod and Empyrean offspring, while concurrently wielding the power to dictate the operation of death within the lands between, with some being even barred from its grasp. Despite Marika not succumbing during the birth of Mogh and Morgott,
hold on, I just want to look back at that promo footage for a second.
The power to dictate the operation of death within the lands between, with some being even barred.
Where is this? Is that Ray Lucaria? That definitely seems like the debate hall that we have Birak in. Oh no, this would be Aiden because he doesn't have the tabard on. And of course, like, I don't think this is really relevant. I was just like, wait a second, where is this?
Barred from its grasp.
Yeah, definitely the debate hall then. That's funny.
Despite Marika not succumbing during the birth of Mogh and Morgott, it's evident that her offspring often bore afflictions, even the Empyrean children destined for godhood. Mogh and Morgott, demigods with a distinctly demonic visage reminiscent of Japanese Oni, evoked comparisons to the ogres of folklore, a departure from the more divine depictions. Marika, troubled by the condition of these progeny, concealed and bound them beneath Lanedell, persisting in her pursuit of divine progeny.
And for what it's worth, the Omen are called Oni in the Japanese text. Of course, it's like Emi Oni, with Emi being like the quote-unquote Omen part, I guess, like with the abominable, but like abominable demons, abominable Oni, abominable ogre might be another way of thinking of them.
Realizing that a union with another entity was requisite for birthing an Empyrean, Marika chose Radagon as her new king consort. Drawing parallels, the offspring from Marika's union with Godfrey align more closely with the children resulting from the initial union of Izanami and Izanagi. Conversely, Marika's Empyrean progeny, while embodying her goals, precipitated the upheaval of the prevailing Golden Order, casting Marika, paralleling Izanami, away from the broader world. To deepen this connection, Izanami begets demon children as a consequence of her initial speech in the meeting with Izanagi. This deviation from the expected protocol considered improper by Izanagi yielded offspring of less than desirable nature. In a parallel vein, Marika in Elden Ring defies the greater will, contravening the divine instructions from the god above her, akin to Izanami's rebellion against the proposed natural order, where she chose to speak first. Seems like being an outspoken, independent woman might earn you either eternal damnation or a binding within a colossal magic tree. Though on a
I almost feel like I should rewatch this because it seems like he's putting Marika and Radagon before Godfrey and also after him in some way. Well, he doesn't seem to put it there, but I don't know. Anyway.
marginally positive note, Izanami is occasionally linked with peaches and immortality. Similarly, Marika, titled Queen Marika the Eternal, who is indeed a god, embodied a semblance of immortality, presiding over the Erdtree's abundant fruits and blessings. Further contemplation leads me to consider the Frenzied Flame as a potential symbol or analog for the fire kami born from Izanami, proving instrumental in her demise. This kami is subsequently fragmented into numerous other kami, presenting a conceivable mythic parallel. The Frenzied Flame's desire to reunite with the One Great might metaphorically signify a return to singular existence, reminiscent of Ymir in Norse mythology or Amatsu Mikabashi in Shinto mythology. Entities
Which is kind of cool that he brings up Ymir, especially before the NPC was introduced in the DLC.
Emblematic of primordial reality. While this interpretation may stretch the bounds of likelihood, similar to much of this analysis, the thematic resonance endures. Izanami perished in the embrace of fire, aligning with Marika's ultimate destruction at the hands of a consuming flame, reducing her and the cherished tree to ashes. Kagutsuchi, the fire kami responsible for Izanami's demise, derives its name from an ancient Japanese phrase meaning shining force, and the Frenzied Flame undeniably embodies such a radiant force in the lands between. Additionally, a pivotal aspect of Shinto tradition revolves around purification rituals, drawing intriguing parallels with Elden Ring. Izanami's corruption during her initial union with Izanagi, resulting in the birth of demon children, evokes reflections on Mogh and Morgott. Notably, the purifying crystal tear proves capable of dispelling the curse afflicting Mogh, and its origin tied to the Erdtree. Radagon, exhibiting a closer and more benevolent connection with the Erdtree in Elden Ring, assumes a role akin to purification, reminiscent of Izanagi. Furthermore, Radagon's conflict with Renala culminated in his self-purification through Celestial Dew, a process seemingly mirroring certain aspects of the Shinto myth, albeit with a twist. Radagon's purification and siring of 3 children preceded his encounter with the counterpart to Izanami, Queen Marika the Eternal. This deviation from the traditional sequence aligns Radagon with the god of creation and purification, much like Izanagi. Radagon emerges as an ideal candidate for godhood, showcasing exceptional versatility. Elden Ring's overarching themes, creation, destruction, and regeneration, resonate profoundly with the foundational tenets of Shinto cosmogony. Marika serving as the Elden Ring's vessel, and Radagon's endeavors to mend the shattered artifact seamlessly weave into the cyclical nature of the game's narrative, echoing the timeless myths of Japanese Shintoism. The exploration of these resonant themes enriching the gaming experience, prompting players to contemplate the enduring facets of human narratives. In summary, the parallels woven between Shinto mythology and the narrative of Elden Ring, notably encapsulated in the characters of Marika and Radagon, extend far beyond mere inspiration. They embody a profound synthesis of cultural influences, creating a narrative tapestry that reverberates with the very essence of Shinto cosmogony. The thematic resonance encapsulating empowerment, transformation, cosmic order, creation, and relationships defies the confines of the gaming realm, propelling Elden Ring into the realm of art. A creation that intricately weaves ancient myths with modern storytelling. The collaborative genius of Hidetaka Miyazaki and George R.R. Martin goes beyond delivering a captivating gaming experience. It serves as an homage to the enduring potency of mythic storytelling, transcending cultural and temporal boundaries. Elden Ring stands as a testament to the universal threads of human experiences, beckoning players to embark on a mythical odyssey that transcends the constraints of time and culture.
Alright, so that was a pretty good video. I'm going to go ahead and link it for you guys in the chat. And then Humble Gamer, nice to see you again. Is Oswald Shabriri? Maybe. Little Church Lore agrees. You do think there's an interweaving of Shinto and Christian theology? Sage Gary, you've argued, is an example of this religion combination of ideas. Would you like to elaborate on that thought? Because it sounds interesting. Then Humble Gamer was saying that you think Gelmir is almost definitely more of a Lord of the Rings reference than a Norse myth one. Is there a Gelmir in Lord of the Rings? I don't remember. And you might be in the past, if you're commenting about Gelmir now. And then Elden Enthusiast, nice to see you again, my guy. How goes it? And hopefully your recovery is going well. What was I gonna talk about? All right. No, Kuni, you're super sick, or is that like the positive sick? And the Discerning Tarnished, welcome on in again. Nice to see you again. Okay, so it does seem like he's live. In Lords of the Ring, Gelmir is a soldier who got killed on a mountain in the worst recorded battle in Elvish history. Oh, so you think the Gelmir battle would be like that mountain? Okay. Do I want the Aladdin news or the Aladdin news? The Aladdin news. How about that? The Disney version. So, Nano Kuni. Like I was saying earlier, I don't know how well this is actually supposed to map onto Elden Ring in general, but after looking into certain things with the DLC and wondering whether or not the land of Shadow was supposed to be literally at the roots of the Erdtree, it has made me more interested in this idea. So, Nano Kuni in the Nihon Shoki refers to a netherworld in Japanese mythology. It is sometimes considered to be identical to Yomi, another netherworld in the myths, as well as Tokuyo no Kuni, literally the Eternal Land. There's no clear consensus on the relationship between these three realms. So, as I talked about in my video about the Jar Ascent and whatnot, Tokuyo no Kuni does literally mean like the Eternal Land. So I've wondered whether or not that's supposed to pertain to Marika the Eternal, because she's also from like the Shaman village. And Nano Kuni, like this first character is literally the character for root, and then Kuni is the character for country, land, realm, etc. So this is like the land of roots essentially, or is this one says the distant land of roots? I don't know where they're getting the distant from, and this kind of like goes back into what I was talking about with like not really knowing like more ancient forms of Japanese super well, because like the first character is essentially like Soko, which means like the bottom of something. So it'd be like the bottom root land, the land beneath the roots, or at the bottom of the roots. But anyway, according to the Kojiki, when Izanagi tasked his children with the rule over the various realms, Amaterasu got the plane of high heaven, Tsukuyomi got the dominion of the night, and Susanoo got the sea plane. Susanoo ignored this command and kept crying over the loss of his dead mother Izanami, such that his weeping led to death and destruction. As Susanoo wished, Izanagi expelled him to be near his mother in Neno Katasukuni. In the previous episodes about Izanami's death, this land is called Yomi. The Nihon Shoki mentions Nano Kuni in passing when describing an episode where Susanoo was banished from Takamagahara for various evil acts he committed and went to a place called Sokotsu Nano Kuni, which is the land of roots. And I wonder if in this interpretation here, then would Susanoo map onto Messmer. But anyway, according to the Kojiki, when Okuninushi visited Nano Kuni and insulted Susanoo, he was submitted to overcome 3 ordeals, one being described to sleep in a house infested with snakes, centipedes, and wasps. This is sometimes taken as another hint that Nano Kuni is a subterranean realm. One explanation of the myth contrasts the trials of Okuninushi to a symbolic death through rites of initiation that cause one to become reborn into a new life. In this story, death does not pollute, it regenerates. The land of the dead also contains the forces of life, Tama, and this might tie into like the whole Mitama type thing that we were talking about a couple streams ago. The Michi-ai no Matsuri Norito, I don't even know what this is an ancient Shinto prayer asking the gods to prevent the evil beings from Nano Kuni to do any harm. And blah blah blah, which is performed in the Great Purification ceremony of the 6th month, locates Nano Kuni in the Great Sea Plain, i.e. the ocean. So part of the reason why I bring that up ties into like the Tokyo no Kuni stuff, but more importantly, like the Yomi stuff. If this is all supposed to be kind of related, like the land of roots is simultaneously kind of like under the sea, but it's also under the roots, which might pertain into the way the lands between. If the Shadow Realm was in the middle of the lands, is kind of where the ocean is now, and might be below that. When we were talking about the Godwin Death Knight stuff, he might have been able to infiltrate the Land of Shadow because the Erdtree's former roots might be connected into the Land of Shadow, but I don't really know what to think about that. And with Yomi and Nei-no-Kuni and Tokyo no Kuni, the Land of the Eternals, all potentially being inter-references for each other, I do wonder how relevant that is into just kind of like contextualizing the Shadow Realm in relation to the lands between. So, interestingly enough, maybe I don't see the relation here, if there is supposed to be one, between like Elden Ring and Yomi, is that like the kanji for Yomi is just like yellow spring. And I think there was a reason for that, but I can't remember what it was. Maybe because they're like sulfurous? Let's see if they talk about yellow. Okay. The kanji that are sometimes used to transcribe Yomi actually refer to the mythological Chinese realm of the dead called Diyu, or Chinese, literally yellow springs, which appears in Chinese texts as early as blah blah blah. This dark and vaguely defined realm was believed to be located beneath the earth, but it was not until the Han Dynasty that the Chinese had articulated it. The characters were used without regard to the actual meaning of the word Yomi. Okay. That makes sense, I guess. So they just use those to describe a similar concept, and it doesn't actually map on. So, okay, the yellow spring doesn't really seem to matter too much. Anyway. It may be a while before you get back to the lore stuff. Sorry to hear about that. You're messing around in the DLC in the meantime. Humble Gamer says, for Gelmir, if it's the other Elvish references in the series like Anor Londo, Irithyll, and the subtext being an Elvish script in your opinion, but who knows, much cross-pollination. Little Church Lore said, Quelaag and others have argued Melania and her associated themes, the cycle of death and rebirth, enlightenment symbolized by the lotus, are inspired by Buddhism. You argued that Sage Gowrie is inspired by Saint Francis. Both Buddhist philosophy and Franciscan theology place significant emphasis on life, death, and rebirth. Okay. Without Horns said you thought Yomi meant darkness. So you might be confusing Yomi and Yami? So let's do a good old G-show. Yami. So Yami means darkness or gammy taste. Anyway, this is like field taste. Anyway, gamey taste. There's no E. Maybe it's not supposed to have an E, but I guess I've never seen gamey just written like that. And let's check out Yomi, which can be another way of saying reading, but that's a different kanji. Inpu. So this is okay, so maybe there is a different way to write down Yomi, because the first character means shade, and the second character, as they show right here, could mean like burrow. I guess I would need to look into, because this sounds like it's supposed to be the path to the underworld rather than Yomi itself. No, this is the same kanji. Yomi-Gairu. Yeah, so... Well, Yomi is certainly affiliated with darkness. It seems to be a different thing. You're welcome. Humble tends to focus more on Western influences and themes for Elden Ring in particular. You don't feel they brought in George and directly name-dropped Michael as world inspirations for no reason? Oh, I wasn't trying to say that there's no reason. I just think that they should all kind of be seen as points of inspiration. So, like I was saying, I don't think a lot of the Izanagi and Izanami stuff maps on super well into the game, and I am very skeptical about the Nei no Kuni / Yomi connections. But after like seeing more of the DLC and that Battlefield Priest cookbook, it really made me consider how much of that was relevant. So 1 second here. Need to find the icon. I should label these sometime. It's not going to be down here, is it? No. I might be better off just like Googling it real quick. I found it. Okay. So this is the Battlefield cookbook, and this is supposed to be depicting the Erdtree. And it looks like we have this weird root system coming out of the bottom of it, but we don't really get that going on anywhere else. And because we're in the Land of Shadow, it's interesting that they go into like such detail about the Erdtree. And of course, if there's any question whether or not that depicts the Erdtree, we've got the ancient Erdtree sigil there. So this has just kind of lived a little bit rent-free in my head after having seen it. Let's pull that back up. It reminds you of the Fair Mizulan depiction of the Elden Ring? Yeah, especially because like you can see the roots in there just a little. And, you know, if Fair Mizulan and its god was connected to the Hornsent, that might be relevant to like this interpretation of things here. But like I said, I really don't know how much it's supposed to map on. Oh, yeah. And I guess because this didn't really come up with this... One other thing which might make it seem as though it might have a little bit more relevance to Elden Ring is that with regard to Japanese mythology, Yomi is generally taken by commentators to lie beneath the earth and is part of a triad of locations discussed in the Kojiki. Takamahara, or Takamagahara, literally the high heavenly plane located in the sky, Ashihara no Nakatsukuni, literally the central land of the Reed Plain, located on Earth, and Yomotsukuni, or Yomi no Kuni, literally the land of Yomi located underground. So, the central land of reeds, is that supposed to map onto the so-called land of reeds in Elden Ring? And then, would we have the Yomi no Kuni being the Shadow Realm, and then the lands between themselves being like the Takamagahara, the high heavenly plane, located in the sky? This isn't necessarily related to Yomi or Shintoism in general, but I have wondered if the whole Hornsent Spira iconography of trying to take a pillar and reach into the heavens is meant to relate to the lands between, and if Marika is literally ascending to godhood and like going above to the lands between. So you decide. Do I remember all the hoopla about the Pleiades constellation on the Shadow Tree avatar? Yeah, vaguely. Maybe not all of the hoopla, but I've definitely heard that idea floated around. And what? I always forget which spell it was in 1.0 that was legitimately called Pleiades. So while Elden gets his reply ready, let's go ahead and... This one might be a little bit too long for the last bit of stream here. Do I have something shorter? I'll just go over. Okay. Stars of Ruin was called Pleiades. Okay, thank you. So, the real face of Lord Rykard, Elden Ring lore. We might have seen this, actually, but maybe not.
Lord Rykard, the head of the Volcano Manor, a ruthless justiciar of the Golden Order and a shard-bearing demigod.
So, tarnished.
I feel like I would have
you
remembered
ever
this, though.
harbored doubts? About the burden of grace and the dogmatic ramblings of the fingers? If you have, why not join the Volcano Manor and fight with us, rise with us, against the Erdtree?
Once a man who was adored and loved by thousands, he befell a most twisted fate. A fate that would label him as one of the greatest enemies of the Erdtree.
Rykard has committed the grave sin of blasphemy. Marking himself as an enemy never to be forgiven.
For Rykard, he was a man that glimmered with all the traits of a great leader. However, deep down, beneath his perfect mask, a darkness was beginning to form. His morals, motivations, and actions would each begin to walk down the narrow path of good and evil, revealing the dark side to what was once a perfect story.
And I do think it's really ironic that blasphemy is such a grave sin, considering like his mom is the god. So he's just like, well, his stepmom is the god. So he's like, you're not my real mom. And they're like, go in your room for eternity. But I mean, Marika should have already been gone by this point. But it's just ironic to me that of all of the demigods vying for the power of the Elden Ring, that Rykard and his methodology in terms of like survival of the fittest is the one that is shunned the most, which I think it's more of a comment on the ends not justifying the means, even in Elden Ring, which is a little bit ironic, I guess. And his form of blasphemy is extra grievous because he's bringing everyone down with him, perhaps. And then, oh, you're not nice to see you again. Is the Church of Igle the Church of Messmer? I don't know. I kind of tend to view them as being different, despite the kind of reused assets of the shedded snakeskin outside Bonnie Village. It's interesting that Mikola is not considered blasphemous, but Rykard is, isn't it? You know, Mikola always got that golden child, the youngest child, beloved treatment, even though Millennia is the youngest technically. Interesting. Little Church Lore said, Zyostorm's Pleiades idea uses your screenshots from your thread on the Pleiades. He mistakenly attributes the screenshot to the 1.0 English version. However, it's 1.07 Brazilian Portuguese. Interesting. So it's called Pleiades even in 1.07 Brazilian Portuguese? Because I know it's called Pleiades in 1.0, according to the text dumps at least. Wait. What did you call it? Stars of Ruin. Is Stars of Ruin different from Founding Rain? Yes, okay. Alright, that one's Lusat's. Because in like 1.0, Founding Rain of Stars is like Goliath's Reign of Stars or something like that. Actually, I could just show it to you guys. I definitely showed it off in my 1.0 playthrough. Yeah, so Goliath's Reign of Stars, then Pleiades. So this matches up with Founding Reign of Stars, and then this matches up with the Ruin that Little Church Lore was talking about. You're the first person to write a Pleiades lore theory? That sucks. Do you feel like plagiarized or anything like that? I tend to not take this stuff too personally. I'm not trying to like overwrite your experience or anything like that. I try to view information as being free, and that as soon as like something is out there, it's out there, and you can't put like the genie back in the bottle or any other aphorism you want to apply there. So if you feel ripped off, that sucks. Maybe you should have like made a Reddit thread complaining about it, but I don't know. Sometimes like bad press is good press, but yeah, I just don't know what else to say about that. All right, so going back to the video then, other than, you know, saying my condolences if that's how you feel.
As one man once said, Nobody is a villain in their own story. We are all the heroes of our own stories. Rykard was born the son of Radagon and Renala. His father Radagon was a champion of the Erdtree and the Golden Order, and his mother was Lady Renala, the head of both the Carian royal family and the Academy of Rea Lucaria. Rykard was not the only child of Radagon and Renala, for he also had both a brother and sister. His brother was the infamous General Radagon, and his sister, the youngest of the 3 siblings, was the ever-gracious Lunar Princess Rani.
Well then, shall we?
During his youth, Rykard would have received the greatest education and privileges that were available to him. His noble upbringing would have allowed him to learn both sorceries and incantations among many other things from an early age, and benefit from a prosperous life living under one of the most prominent houses within the lands between. However, it was only a matter of time before certain events would begin to unfold, events that would force a drastic change to Rykard's lavish lifestyle. One day, Queen Marika of the Golden Order relinquished her husband Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, of his grace and titles, commanding him and his followers to leave the lands between and wage war in a far-off land. Upon Godfrey's exile, the title of Elden Lord and husband to Queen Marika became vacant, at which point Radagon, the husband of Renala, was called upon to be the next Elden Lord. This caused Radagon to abandon Renala's side, the reasons for which are still unclear even to this day. Rykard's father, Radagon, left Renala to become Queen Marika's new consort and the second Elden Lord, and as a result of this, not only was Rykard's mother left devastated and heartbroken, but he and his siblings were raised to the status of demigod by their new stepmother, Marika. Whilst Rykard may not have known it at the time, this very act would serve as the first tragic step that would set him on the path towards corruption and depravity. As time progressed, Rykard grew into what was initially perceived to be a righteous and ambitious man. A leader amongst men who was adored and loved by thousands for his ideals and virtues, which in turn inspired many people to both follow and look up to him when the time inevitably came. However, beneath the surface of Rykard's perfect image, his true nature and desires would slowly begin to take hold, prompting a slow but drastic change to who he truly was at heart. At some point during Rykard's lifetime, he ascended to the rank of Justiciar under the Golden Order. This allowed him to administer punishments to those who were deemed heretics and enemies of the Golden Order, which he did so with a cruel ruthlessness, often torturing and condemning those who crossed his path to an unfortunate fate. Alongside this, he also commanded a company of inquisitors, who would hunt down those who were deemed impure, such as the Albinaurics and many other beings within the lands between. Rykard would continue to remain a ruthless justiciar for some time, until one day, he decided to leave his home and position behind, opting to go traveling and explore the lands for himself.
That was all. Okay, this might be like the Tanith connection. Then I could see where he's going with that. Because I was going to say, so far, this all has been pretty straightforward, and I didn't really have much to comment on. And then this is like, huh? So yeah, I think he's probably going into the Tanith stuff. So then, Little Church Lore was saying that they do feel like the work was the inspiration for the idea, along with using the visuals she used to develop her thesis. It's not necessary to cite yourself when writing about the Pleiades. However, it appears your theory and visuals are the basis for the idea, which you believe earns a citation. Yeah, that's fair enough. Honestly, have you considered making videos or anything like that? I really do recommend people that if they're this passionate about the lore, to at least consider giving it a go. And if you don't want to like use a mic or you don't have the equipment or anything like that, that's totally understandable. There are alternative ways to like make things work, whether or not it's AI voice generation, using like Fiverr to get like voice actors. I've had a couple people over the years like offer me their services, but I'm like, yo guys, my channel's not really big enough to warrant having like a recurring voiceover actor, and my workflow isn't consistent enough to like be really feasible. So it just hasn't really been anything that I've considered seriously, but for others it might be worth looking into. You have a video on your channel. It's about the Pleiades. I didn't even know you had a channel. Let me go ahead and go to that. Hey guys, Little Church Lore has a channel. Let's go ahead and give her some support. 2 years old now. So that's the link there. Maybe avoid the AI voiceover software. No, just use that like goofy ass TikTok voiceover that sounds like a dude from like Boston or something. The guy who talks like this but worse. You know, that'll do great for like the lore videos. Yeah. Okay, I'll need to check that out sometime if you don't mind. And all right, let's go back in.
On his journey, he came across what was known to many as Mount Gelmir, a giant yet dark mountain range, and at its center lay an active volcano, which at the time harbored a dark and unknown secret at its core.
The Pizza Hut.
Deep within the volcano, Rykard discovered an ancient serpent deity religion, a religion that not too long ago, when he was still a Justiciar, he would have deemed it as heresy towards the Erdtree and the Golden Order. At the center of this ancient religion, Rykard came across a god-devouring serpent by the name of Agle. This monstrous serpent was the deity that was worshipped by the original natives of Mount Gelmir during a time which has long been forgotten. This ancient religion consisted of ritualistic sacrifices that were then offered to the Great Serpent, which some would believe allowed these people to learn new volcanic sorceries and hexes. After this discovery, Rykard elected to make the active volcano his new home, building a mighty castle at the peak of the mountain, and committing himself to learning the very same volcanic hexes and sorceries that the ancient religion had learned long ago.
So speaking about ancient hexes and whatnot, I'm just trying to think of whether or not the tower hexes constitute as like quote unquote real hexes as far as like the game are concerned, or is concerned, at least in regard to Rykard or Necromancer Garrus, because they made it sound like the hexes fell out of style for a time and they had to be rediscovered. But if the Hornsents were chilling in the Land of Shadow up until Renala and Ralana's time, at the very least, still doing their kind of form of hexing, then what gives? Sloppy writing? I don't know. It'd be cool if Super Hunter worked on Messmer,
again,
for real.
Rykard was beginning to change, committing himself to the very acts that he once deemed as blasphemous, and whether he was aware of it or not, the very morals and ideals that upheld the image of the noble and ambitious Lord Rykard were beginning to shake. For all his love and greatness, Rykard had a dark side that was hidden away, a dark side with twisted desires and wants, desires that he would quite literally hide away under the lock and key of the Volcano Manor.
I saw something.
I do like that little imagery of the imps and their stone sword keys to go with the dialogue there. And also, I almost mentioned this earlier, but every time I see like a lore tuber using the Raging Wolf set with the cape, I get a little bit disappointed, because it's like, oh, they were so close to having it like right for the FromSoft cinematic canonicity of the main character, I guess. But on that note, I'll admit it took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that the intro, maybe not intro cutscene, but the original trailer characters were using the altered version of the Raging Wolf set. Because I looked at it and I was like, oh man, for some reason this just doesn't hit like I thought it would. Because I hadn't paid attention that the trailer stuff was using the altered form. Because I actually really do like and enjoy the Raging Wolf set appearance-wise. I was like, oh yeah, this is a really cool like stand-in for the Elite Knight armor set of like Dark Souls. And this is kind of like a different direction for it. So I'm a big fan of this armor set, even though like I do mostly use it for lore purposes for my channel.
Hide away under the lock and key of the Volcano Manor.
I saw something slithering in the pitch black of night. Does the Volcano Manor hide some secret?
Underneath the prestigious surface of the Volcano Manor, Rykard would carry out horrific acts of torture and experimentation on those who he deemed impure and unworthy. He began construction on many horrific contraptions and devices, the most infamous of which would come to be known as the Abductor Virgins. These horrific contraptions possessed not only the ability to cause devastation on the battlefield, but also, as its name suggests, abduct people and have them sent back to the Volcano Manor for experimentation and torture.
And of course, with the references of the Abductor Virgins and them cradling the child in a pose that's kind of similar to the way that Marika cradles a child in the Messmer chambers, which I mean, oh no, a woman cradling a child, how original can you really make that pose look? It might be worth examining whether or not the snakes are supposed to be relevant to this image of a woman cradling a child and whatnot, but I guess. Okay, let's go off the lore deep end for a moment here and entertain the possibility that this is unironically supposed to be Messmer. And not only is it supposed to unironically be Messmer, what if this is also unironically meant to portray Marika? So I went off the deep end and lost why I was going to make this point. Damn it. Oh, right. So, if the snakes mean that this is Messmer, then does this contraption being called an Abductor Virgin have something to say about Marika and the birth of this child? Does that mean that Messmer was the byproduct of a virgin birth? Or could it just be a kind of cover story in that Marika may have had him at a time in which he was unwed? And could that imply that Messmer would then be the first child? I'm sure certain people are going to love that idea, and others are going to hate that idea because of Godric's Great Rune saying that Godfrey and the Golden Lineage are the first demigods. But that's why I said, let's jump off into the deep end right here. So enjoy. Fight amongst yourselves. Without horns, doesn't like the capes in the game. If you can alter them off, you almost always do. Yeah, Pietà theory time. A little bit. And then Little Church Lore says virgin is an analogous term for saint. Is that... Do we still have Corn in chat? Can he elaborate? Not to say that I disbelieve you, but from my understanding of the two terms, that seems like going a little bit too far. So that just could be my ignorance speaking here. Oh, you saw it? Okay. I don't know like why exactly I'm laughing because I can't tell how serious Elden Enthusiast is. But you said you saw a video about how the red dancer set in the DLC is blue if you alter it. You don't know if the description changes though. So part of the reason why I was laughing is because that just kind of reminds me of the whole quote, if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bike. I don't know if you can alter the red dancer set because I haven't tried. So the first way I read that was like, yeah, if you alter the image to be blue, it'll be a blue red dancer set. So it's just like, yeah, if you change it, of course it's going to be different. But that would be wild if it could change to blue. I haven't seen a second set description for it though. I don't think just the headpiece or something like that. And Little Church Lore was saying the torture device, the spiked wheel, originates with a saint as well, Saint Catherine. True story. Well, kind of. At least as far as, like, in the West goes. Because I know, like, the wheel has been a torture device elsewhere as well. Although maybe not. Maybe it was just kind of borrowed iconography from, like, the Saint Catherine thing. And then Without Horns was asking, are they virgins that abduct or just abductor virgins? If so, we truly are maidenless. Okay. So it looks like Corn is dead in the chat. Anyway. And then Liam Vickers, nice to see you again. You thought it looked black, personally? The blue-red dancer set? Anyway, let's go back into the video.
And have them sent back to the Volcano Manor for experimentation and torture. At the time, it would seem that very few people outside of Rykard's home knew of the horrors that were happening there. Yet, the very fact that some people had now seen this side of Rykard, it was clear that he was no longer able to appear as the perfect and righteous man that he once was. As Rykard's true feelings would begin to surface.
Actually, you know what? I've always taken it for granted that
the Volcano Manor itself,
that Rykard may have burned that minor Erdtree outside of Mount Gelmir using either one or a combination of the Black Flame or the Frenzied Flame or his like lava hex sorceries. But even though I am skeptical of him like really looking up to Messmer or anything like that, I guess I can bring up the question whether or not he would have looked into Messmer Fire to burn that Erdtree specifically. And if he did use Messmer Fire, does that pertain, or does that have any relevance to the alleged burning of the Erdtree as a cardinal sin? But I also don't really like that idea much at all, just because we have no real tangible Messmer Rykard connections in the base game, despite what I like just attribute to snakes in the Volcano Manor. I want something a bit more than that. Like, at least Messmer Fire Grease, even if it's put in retroactively, would be good enough, perhaps.
The very manor which he had built would begin to serve as a physical reflection of Rykard's true nature and intentions. Magnificent and bold on the outside, yet monstrous and full of horror within. However, although it may seem that Rykard was destined for a dark path, not all that was good within him had been lost. At some point during his travels, Rykard left the lands between to visit a foreign land, and whilst there, he came across a dancer by the name of Tanith, the very same that the player Tarnished can stumble across within the Volcano Manor. Upon their meeting, Rykard was instantly captivated by Tanith, and it would seem that the two of them grew to be very close very quickly. As time passed, both Rykard and Tanith grew to love each other dearly, and not long after, Rykard would take Tanith as his consort, and the two of them would reside as the Lord and Lady of the Volcano Manor together.
Hey Pigsy, nice to see you again. So, one of the things that I enjoy the most about the Tanith Rykard love story, which may or may not be intentional, is whether or not Tanith as a dancer was kind of a literal snake charmer with the Rykard situation.
With this very act, it would seem that Rykard's monster within, the very monster who was a torturous and blasphemous individual, was also capable of compassion and love. And yet, this small act of goodness and love would pale in comparison to Rykard's actions, given the events that followed.
Yo, Pigsy, stop being so crude, otherwise I will mute you.
One day, Rykard's sister Rani devised a terrible plot, a plot that would result in the death of their demigod half-brother, Godwyn the Golden. Rykard's blasphemous incantations led him to assist Rani in a deceitful plot that came to be known to many as the Night of Black Knives. On the night of the plot, Rani rewarded Rykard with a slab of rock engraved with the traces of the Rune of Death.
Man, so the one time I was going to let something go just because I didn't want to continue being so pedantic, that Horns brings up the question. Wait, he left the lands between? You were under the impression that Tanith came to him rather than the other way around. So I don't remember the exact specifics off the top of my head, so we may as well like look into it. Is it the Castanets which talks about it? Not exactly. Maybe I'll just need to type in Tanith. This might take a minute. There's a lot of items about this, apparently. Okay. Long ago, when Rykard first set eyes on Tanith, she was working as a dancer in a foreign land, which that would make it sound as though he must have been in the foreign land if she was a dancer in a foreign land. I guess the Japanese is a bit more ambiguous in that she was the dancer of a foreign land rather than a dancer in a foreign land in the Japanese. So she could have been she could have been a foreign dancer who came to the lands between. So the English makes it sound one way, but okay. So it's ambiguous, I guess, ultimately. Okay. Good question, though. The one time I was going to leave sleeping dogs lie.
This was a fragment of the Rune of Death, which Rani had stolen from Malekith, and should the day ever transpire, it would allow Rykard to challenge the Black Beast of Destined Death himself. As a result of the Night of Black Knives, this set off the chain of events that led to Queen Marika of the Golden Order shattering the Elden Ring. This very act would send the lands between into utter chaos, and each of Marika's demigod children would acquire the great runes within it. Their newfound strength led to a war between the demigods, each seeking to become the new ruler of the lands between. However,
and for some reason, I know this is kind of a big question mark for many players about whether or not the demigods had already had the runes or if they were gathered after the shattering had occurred. But, sorry, who is the maker of this video again? As Lord Brain is saying, he's kind of just quoting directly from one of the, I think it's actually just the Elden Ring website. Oops. All right, yeah. It should be this right here. The Golden Order has been broken. Rise, tarnished, and be guided by grace to brandish the power of the Elden Ring and become an Elden Lord in the lands between. In the lands between, ruled by Queen Marika the Eternal, the Elden Ring, the source of the Erdtree, has been shattered. Marika's offspring, demigods all, claimed the shards of the Elden Ring known as the Great Runes, and the mad taint of their newfound strength triggered a war, the Shattering. A war that meant abandonment by the greater will. So, just in case anybody happened to be wondering about that, because I have seen those questions arise from time to time.
For Rykard, his ambitions and desires lay elsewhere. Upon seeing the bloodshed and war that was brought forth by the Shattering, Rykard grew tiresome of the gods, the same gods that he once served under the Golden Order, and unlike his demigod siblings, Rykard viewed the Shattering as the greater will, abandoning the people and his family, and forcing them into what he deemed as a petty quarrel and conflict with each other.
The Tarnished were forced to scavenge, squabbling for crumbs, like the Shard Bearers vying for power in the wake of the Shattering. Our Lord, indignant, has refused to scurry about, fighting over what miserly scraps they allow us. If the Erdtree, and indeed the very gods, would debase us so, then we are willing to raise the banner of resistance, even if it means heresy.
And
it was in
this is one of my favorite tropes about the FromSoft games, where you kind of get a touching story with a very human element to the characters, which makes them very sympathetic at first, only to kind of be duped by such sympathies and being fed to a giant snake for not picking up on the fact that in order to end the war, there needs to be an ultimate victor, and you're just kind of intended to be somebody's stepping stone on that journey, just as you would put others beneath your feet as stepping stones on your own journey. So that is just one thing that I appreciate about the games, because there is a sort of realism to that. Yeah, and as Humble Gamer is saying, Estrella and Garl. Actually, wait, why are you saying Estrella and Garl? Anyway, I wonder if you're just saying, like, Tanith is kind of like Estrella, and Garl is like, you know, the brawn behind the operation. Little Church Lore said, agreed, there's a shocking element to various characters who are otherwise sympathetic. Yeah. Honestly, I'm a little bit surprised that Selen doesn't turn on the Tarnished at the end of her quest. Well, I guess probably because she ends up having a more tragic one. Maybe if she stuck around longer, it could have been a more tragic end for us. Who knows?
This moment that Rykard declared war on the Erdtree and the very gods themselves, launching a blasphemous campaign against them and indulging in every act imaginable that could be used to defy them. Alongside this, many people carried the same belief as Rykard, that the gods had abandoned and turned on them, and so one by one they began to follow his cause. During this time, it would seem that Rykard still possessed the love of the people, and his rebellion against the Erdtree began to grow in number, believing that they were fighting for a just and fair cause. Yet for Rykard, his ideals and ambitions took a selfish turn, and at some point during the war, Rykard began the pursuit for immortality. Perhaps he intended to curse the gods with this act and defy their will, or maybe the war had affected and warped his mind, sparking a fear of eternal death. Regardless of this, he was no longer the virtuous and honorable Lord Rykard that everybody once knew, but instead a cruel and corrupted individual. What followed next was the very act that would forever mark his name in history and also earn him his namesake as Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, and an enemy of the Erdtree. As Rykard's morals and ambitions changed, he elected to commit what was arguably the most defiant and horrid act that would not only spurn the gods, but also allow Rykard to continue his pursuit for immortality. He decided to engage in a sickening...
Now I'm kind of re-wondering why we've got Jarfolk underneath Volcano Manor, and whether or not they were a more recent addition, or if they're like a Hornsent type of leftover. By which I mean, I don't think that the Volcano Manor belonged to the Hornsent or anything like that. Although we do get the spirally pillars. Am I really going to have to think this over again? I guess I need to revisit the Volcano Manor. So anyway, we do have Jarfolk there, but to be fair, we also have like Jarfolk and Stormvale. And they all have like the Erdtree crest on them. They don't have the Land of Shadow type Halig tree looking like thing. So I don't know. Just perhaps we're thinking about. You think the Jarfolk are just mending their jars like Alexander? Maybe. And then Little Church Lore was saying, speaking of Tanith, Zarias is the Persian word for Pleiades. Sometimes it's spelled Sorias as well. Interesting. Cool, thank you. And then Jay Dixon, nice to see you again. Humble Gamer is saying, they earnestly claim to help the people of the Vale and act as misunderstood martyrs, but they're essentially just lobotomizing those people. Get wrecked. Sort of like a corruption of their once noble mission, as according to her soul, she's both innocent yet truly demonic. Sorry, whose soul is both innocent and demonic? Did I miss a message? Oh, sorry, you're talking about Estrella and Garl. Okay, let me reread this stuff. So Estrella and Garl earnestly claim to help the people of the Vale and act as misunderstood martyrs, but they're essentially just lobotomizing those people, sort of like a corruption of their once noble mission, as according to her soul, she's both innocent yet truly demonic. So I still think that despite everything, Estrella is not quote-unquote lobotomizing the people, because they're offering her their souls willingly, because they're suffering as a result of everything that's going on. And the Valley of Defilement is kind of relevant to the whole theme of Kagare that I've been talking about with Elden Ring and whatnot, because the Valley of Defilement is essentially just the Valley of Kagare in Japanese. But moving on beyond that point, Estrella is recognized canonically as being like one of the most holy beings in the Demon Souls pantheon, whatever you want to call it. And she's also one of the most profane for accepting the souls and the suffering of everyone else. And it is also worth remembering that in Demon Souls, the old one is kind of both a god and a demon. So there's that kind of duality there. And so Astraea being compared to a demon is true in the sense that the old one is kind of a demon sucking the souls out of everything. And so I think she's a bit of a tragic figure because they don't understand the root of the problem, and they're just trying to focus on things locally rather than globally. Right, going back to the Rykard stuff.
Birthing ritual within the manor, and some would believe that another participant of this ritual was a woman by the name of Daedakar, where it is stated that this woman has indulged in every form of adultery and wicked pleasure imaginable, giving birth to a myriad of grotesque children. Perhaps Rykard chose to have this woman take part in the ritual as a further way to spite the gods and create the most blasphemous being imaginable. However, the exact acts of the ritual are not made clear. Following this, the ritual would see Rykard offer himself up to the great serpent within the volcano, in the hopes of merging together with the creature as one. When Rykard gave himself to the serpent, the birth of the man-serpents followed. The deformed...
I have always also liked how the snake kind of resembles a clutched hand or a fist in this image in particular.
When Rykard gave himself to the serpent, the birth of the man-serpents followed, the deformed and vile offspring of the horrid birthing ritual. One of these serpents, however, can be encountered by the player Tarnished, and she chooses to introduce herself as Raya of the Volcano Manor and the daughter of Lady Tanith.
She's got green eyes.
However, what Raya...
Does that mean Roderica's a snake as well? No, but in all seriousness, I was just thinking that it is interesting that Messmer Snake in his normal Messmer form are all red and have green eyes too.
Doesn't know is who her true birth mother is. Yet upon following her questline, it is heavily implied to be Daedakar, the very same woman to take part in Rykard's blasphemous ritual. For Raya, though it would seem that she was born of an impure nature, there are many who would agree that she is a kind soul who is pure of heart, and her existence serves as the physical embodiment of the change to both Rykard's beliefs and ideals, as he was now responsible for the creation of many impure beings, the very same that he used to hunt and persecute all those years ago, back when he was the Justiciar of the Golden Order. Rykard was no longer the noble man that was once adored by thousands, having changed now not only mentally, but also physically. His dark and true nature that he had kept locked away for so long had finally crawled its way to the surface, and with a change of the body comes a change of the mind and heart. After this, his defiance towards the earth...
Bro, how come I never bring up Rykard in the issue of the duality, or dualities in Elden Ring? Maybe because he's kind of more like grafting in a way, and not like innately dual. He was eaten to be the way that he is. I don't know.
Erdtree and the gods instead shifted once more, developing into an obsessive and endless greed for both power and immortality. Power that he believed he could gain by consuming powerful beings and welcoming them into what he referred to as his family.
I feel like it's really hard to resist the temptation of using a clip with Rykard's voice.
Together we will devour the very god.
Rykard's horrid acts would not only disgrace those that he deemed his enemies, but also himself and all who stood with him. The very same people that once flocked to his cause to defy the gods, upon seeing their leader and idol abandon all morality, they could not help but be overcome with moral disillusionment, falling to despair at the sight of what their beliefs had become. Whatever that thing is, it is no longer Praetor Rykard. Someone must kill him, to spare him and his ambitions from further dishonor. His soldiers would begin to abandon his cause due to the costly battles that they fought during the wars, one of which is said to be the site of the most pitiful battle of the entire war. Not all hope was lost for Rykard, however, as many of his soldiers were still loyal to who he once was, and instead began to carry out desperate attempts to end his dishonor, which they did so by hunting down a weapon known as the Serpent's Spear, where it is stated, when their master's heroic aspirations degenerated into mere greed, his men searched for a weapon with which they might halt their lord.
Ruh-roh, Raggy. Looks like we have some spiral iconography on the spear itself. So anyway, Little Church Lore was asking if I heard the content dialogue for Rykard. I don't think I've heard it, but I've probably definitely seen it before on the text dump. So, a fine sacrifice indeed, let us devour the gods together. Now you are family, now we can devour the gods together. O shaper of gods, meddlers in fortune, I do not abide by your suffocating order. Oh. Eveline, show him the way to devour the gods. No one will hold me captive. A serpent never dies. Okay, and then we get Blythe stuff. Eveline. Let me check. Alright. Is this a Rao weapon or something? It uses light like it's a sword of light. Maybe. So then do the Rao folk fight serpents? Evelyn is a derivative of Eve? Yeah, but the only issue is we don't find her in a library, so it can't truly be Evelyn, can it?
This very act serves as a testament to just how beloved and revered Rykard once was, as now, the very ideals that upheld who he was at heart had changed when he merged with the Great Serpent. Following this change, the only thing that his most loyal followers wanted was to see him laid to rest with what little honor he had left still intact. Lord Rykard, if this putrid field of death is what your blasphemy would bring, then I can no longer abide. No one can. Despite everything that had come to pass, there was still one person that Rykard held close to his heart. Before his change, he offered his consort Tanith, the woman he loved, a tonic of forgetfulness. It would seem that Rykard did not want Tanith to witness his grotesque change, and be forced to watch the man that she loved leave her side forever. This act alone showed that he still possessed some humanity, right up until the end, hoping to protect Tanith from whatever came next. However, to Rykard's surprise, Tanith instead rejected the tonic, and is quoted as saying, "My lord, there could be no greater distress than to forget you." Tanith had sworn herself to Rykard, and following in the wake of his change, she opted to form a cult-like group that went on to be known as the Recusants. The Recusants were known to wage war against the Erdtree and the Roundhold Table, or namely anyone that they deemed as an ally of the Erdtree or gods. The end goal of
Speaking of Tanith and her end goal, I am still really sad that we don't get to fight the demigod Tanith in the DLC. I was holding out hope that we get something more with, the consumption of Lord Rykard.
Tanith was to recruit champions from across the lands, and once they became strong enough, she had them sent to Rykard for what they believed was a meeting with their lord. But instead, the champions were eaten and consumed by Rykard, so that he may become stronger and a part of the Serpent family. It would seem that this act carried on for some time, until one day, the player Tarnished arrived at the manor, and should they choose to follow the Recusant's questline, they too can be tricked into an audience with Lord Rykard. This ruse, however, would not continue as it had always done up to that point, and as we already know, Rykard is defeated and brought down by the Tarnished using the Serpent's Spear, bringing an end to not only his blasphemous campaign against the Erdtree, but also an end to his shame and dishonor. Following the defeat of Rykard, some would argue that he was able to achieve redemption for his past sins and crimes. The corrupting influence of his ambition led him away from what really mattered most. The people who believed in and loved him dearly were all driven away from his cause, as he was no longer the man that they had once adored. In his noble quest,
were they really driven away, or did they just become part of his family in a new, exciting way? And then Elden wished that the Recusants were a proper Covenant faction and that we did something with those damn castanets patches gave us. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about the Covenants because I did enjoy aspects of them in like Dark Souls 3 and even DS1 to an extent, but it also kind of sucked having to grind out so many Covenant items for like the trophies. So I just wish they were refined a bit more. But yeah, it does suck that we got nothing in place of them. Because he said if they added Covenants, they would have done PvP, but you haven't touched it. I really touched PvP? Like maybe like the first week or so, and then I stopped. Not that I've ever been super interested in the PvP of FromSoft games because of like the netcode issues, but also like doing content creation, I was on older versions of the game for like being able to use mods and whatnot. Farm the Silver Knights? I'm saying that was the problem. It was boring farming those.
To overthrow the Erdtree and consume the gods, he left only a trail of death and treachery in his wake. And yet, despite all of this, he was able to retain the love he had for his consort, Tanith. Perhaps Rykard offered the tonic of forgetfulness to Tanith because he did not wish to inflict any pain towards Tanith when he left, the same way that his father Radagon inflicted pain towards his mother Renala when he abandoned her all those years ago. Whilst his goals were righteous, his methods were not, and on his journey he became that which he used to hunt and hate, a consumed and corrupt enemy of the Erdtree who had sacrificed his own humanity in the name of ambition. As a result of this, Rykard most likely saw himself as a hero to the people, the hero who was to lead them into the new age. His soldiers would have seen him as a fallen hero, someone who once stood for greatness but was corrupted and changed, never to return.
So I'm pausing the video not to talk about the video, unfortunately, but I was just thinking about how difficult it is and would be to incorporate covenants and things like that in general into the games, because thinking back to like Dark Souls 1, in order to get like the Great Spear of Light or whichever miracle it was, you needed to get to like the max level in the Sunlight Bro Covenant, which takes a lot of grinding to do to get pretty much the most effective, or maybe perhaps better said, the not least effective miracle for like dealing damage in that game. And that kind of sucks that they don't really have a lot of redundant ways to get rewards. And I was wondering like if there'd be a better way of doing that. And then I was thinking like maybe, and you know, this is a stretch, so you guys can feel free to disagree or maybe take the idea and tweak it and see if it jives with you guys, in that as much as reticent as I am to suggest it, maybe for things like spells and perhaps even equipment, what if there was like a skill tree system where when you leveled up, you can work your way to certain spells or equipment and whatnot? And what if like the Covenant rewards were just like one Covenant item equals one skill point, and there might be some recursion in what Covenant you work with if they could just be made into generic skill points and they were just like for lore flavor differences. That might be one way of like tweaking things, or maybe having like the Miracle Covenant be rewarding like miracle skill tokens or something like that. So maybe it's like functionally not all that different, and maybe it's not the best of ideas, but if it was incorporated into the game more holistically from the beginning, it might not be so terrible. But I don't know. There's already a ton of games that have like skill systems, and I don't know if it would ultimately be made better if that was actually in a FromSoft game. I'm kind of curious to see like what it would be like to mod a game like Elden Ring with some of these ideas, but I don't know how well like that economy problem can really be solved. There's one PvE covenant in Elden Ring, the Ancient Dragon Cult. Why do you say that? You could do others that require something besides Dragon Hearts. Little Church Lore agrees. You think it would be interesting to develop a system where learning new incantations or spells required study or acquiring new knowledge. Yeah, so, okay. Now I'm going to get on my soapbox tangent rant a little bit about World of Warcraft. So, I haven't played like a ton of WoW, but I mean, I played a couple expansions here and there. And I played a decent chunk of Legion, and that was a pretty good expansion, all things considered, at the very, very end of it. I think it had a ton of problems, like, in the beginning, but I don't want to get into that too much. Like, artifact power is kind of stupid. I digress. When they were making the transition from Legion to Battle for Azeroth... Wait, was it Battle for Azeroth? Yeah. Legion, Battle for Azeroth in the Shadowlands. We went from, the main world into the new continent, which is like tradition at this point, and it's kind of annoying. But one of the things that I thought was just really unfortunate is that when World of Warcraft goes from the expansions and they like change up skills and skill trees and whatnot, they don't ever really tie any of that into the story or the lore of the game. And maybe that's fair because like things ultimately change with each expansion. But for my character, I liked to play a Shadow Priest, and when I got into the new zone, there was essentially a god of death that we could interact with, and I was like, oh man, this is so cool. I wonder if we'll like learn any kind of new spells as a Shadow Priest pertaining to like this death type of thing, and there wasn't. It was just kind of all in the skill tree, and there were like no quest givers or like no really new spells pertaining to the new area, which is really disappointing. So there's good ways to do things and bad ways to do things, and I don't necessarily think it's a one-size-fits-all solution. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up as one thing that I thought was disappointing. They get dragon miracles in the same way the Sunlight Covenant houses lots of the Gwyn-related stuff in terms of the presence of the world. For the Ancient Dragon Cult in Elden Ring? That's not true. You can get all the dragon stuff without doing... Oh, you said PvE. Well, do you mean like co-op, or do you actually mean PvE? Anyway, let's go back to the video. Only a few minutes left.
And as for Tanith, she simply saw the man that she loved, no matter his form, and swore herself to be by his side always. Rykard's story does not end there, as after his defeat, Tanith can be seen consuming the remains of Rykard, in the hope that he will one day return and live on through her, just as he had lived through the great serpent of Mount Gelmir. With his dying breath, Rykard lays claim to his immortality, calling out to the Tarnished with his final moment and bearing the words,
I serve never
My characters who come back from death are worse for wear. In some ways, they're not even the same characters anymore. The body may be moving, but some aspect of the spirit is changed or transformed, and they've lost something. Once there was a time when...
I just love the imagery of Tanith consuming Rykard's writhing corpse. It's so damn cool.
Rykard had only darkness deep down, but the darkness had surfaced, and yet, perhaps now with his supposed death, deep down there was only a faint trace of good that lingered within him. The will to do what he believed was right, and the love for those that he truly cared for.
Oh yeah, so that was actually a really good video, really self-contained, giving a really good overview of the story of Rykard. So definitely recommend giving Lorebrain some support here. So here is the link to that video in the chat there. I've already been subscribed. I don't remember what else I've watched. But anyway, just kind of curious if there's anything else. Was Godric right? Wait, I've watched this? This is kind of what sucks about YouTube, because I might have like clicked on something and maybe watched 2 seconds, and then it says like, oh, you watched this entire thing, or maybe I did watch it entirely on stream. Anyway, yeah, it was a good one. You like his channel, Lore ASMR? He's got a great voice. I hate him. And then Hummel said, since I described grinding for Covenant items, Little Church Lore seemed to get what you meant. Okay. Oh, so you mean like in Elden Ring, grinding for those Covenant... Okay, I see what you mean now. Okay. Sorry, when I was talking about like grinding for the Covenant items, I see what you mean now. I just mean there's something a little bit different than like the boss progression of killing the magma worms, or even the drakes, to me, than having to reset an area and kill 4 specific Silver Knights that have like a 2% drop rate for one specific item. So like when I did that on Dark Souls 3 when I was Covenant grinding, I was literally streaming that in a secret stream and watching lore videos on the side at like double speed because it was so mind-numbing. But anyway, yeah, I see what you mean, that there are some like gated things behind that. And I don't think that's like the worst thing to do when, at least with the Elden Ring stuff, you have some choice with what you can spend your items on. I think that's a pretty good thing. So that way, if you want to use like X-Sykes Rot Breath, you don't have to literally kill every dragon in the game to do that. Which is, you know, a plus for me. So, yeah, I think if Elden Ring had something like that at the beginning, like if you had a skill tree where you could access any spell or incantation and you like had to invest into them, and if you like wanted to power them up, that would be a cool thing to do. Maybe that would be really cool for like the what do they call it in Elden Ring? The attunement stat? Wait, there is no attunement in Elden Ring. Yeah, those are just memory slots. Never mind. Anyway, yeah, hopefully you get what I mean. And part of like what annoys me the most about like the Covenant grinding stuff is the way to do it the most effectively almost requires a respecking into a arcane / luck build and then swapping back to a different spec once you're done, which wouldn't be a problem except for the fact that there's always a limited amount of respecking items per new game cycle, which is just why haven't they learned? Okay, everybody, that'll be it for tonight's stream. Thank you all for attending as always. We'll be going live again at the same time of 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so hopefully we'll catch you on the next one. So until then, take care, stay safe. That's Protagonist out.